So, hello, a very warm good evening to all of you, and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IS. Welcome to the session of Environment Ecology, where we shall be continuing our discussion for the portion of biodiversity and the conservation measures today. Now, yesterday we have had a detailed discussion about the aspects and the intricacies of climate change and also the impact of climate change, the details of it. What do we understand by radiative forcing? What is geoengineering? What can be done as a mitigation strategy for carbon sequestration? And also, how is it that we can store the carbon? What is the concept of carbon offsetting, carbon tax? Now, these details are also going to help us when we approach the portion of, let's suppose, Kyoto Protocol, etc., when we talk about it tomorrow. Having said that, an announcement for all of you that day after tomorrow, that is on Thursday, which is going to be the last session. That session, we are going to deal with the question and answers in the sense that basically any kind of queries that you have in this portion of environment, any portions which you found it to be difficult to comprehend in the portion of environment and ecology, we are going to pick up that question, and that is going to be a doubt clearing session on Thursday. In the first part of the session, for about an hour, we shall be talking about some concepts about environmental impact assessment. But after that, we shall be purely concentrating upon the doubts that you have. So as to ensure, the aim is to ensure that at the end of this entire module, that is after Thursday, you should not have any lingering doubt about the portion of environment ecology, be it about strategy, be it about the materials, what needs to be studied, how you need to approach it, or any particular area that you found it difficult to comprehend. Any kind of doubts associated with the subject, please absolutely feel free to ask. Now, for that, there is a process that we are going to follow. And for that, I would request you that please send over a mail, send a mail to us at IES Live, and then please write the subject of that mail as the doubt for the doubt clearing session of environment, and put your questions there so that we have a comprehensive list of questions that we are going to deal with. So there in the doubt clearing session, we will be dealing with those particular queries which have been sent to us beforehand so as to have an organized discussion about it. Okay, so please do send over that particular mail or any kind of queries that you have. Okay, so accordingly, we will hold the discussion for that. Okay. B. Rama, I hope that you have got the communication over, because the team was trying to contact you, get in touch with you, and I hope that you have seen the mail accordingly, right? So, is it important to learn all the important deserts and their location? You should be aware about it. You should be aware about it, and that's it, right? So that awareness is more than sufficient. It is not going to be the case that UPSC is going to ask you where Kalahari Desert is, but you can always get a match the following kind of a question about the desert and its location. That kind of a query, that kind of a question can always be framed for you. Okay. And many of you have been sending the mail about the aspect of what are the materials which are required to be studied for this subject. And again, I will reiterate that for this portion of environment and ecology, please only concentrate on the PPTs, the ARMs, along with the portion of current affairs. You cannot choose to ignore the portion of current affairs when you are studying with such dynamic concepts such as environment, science and tech, etc. In that, current affairs becomes instrumental. So the PPTs and ARMs, please don't go through multiple different books. It is not of any benefit out of for you when it comes to the requirement of the examination. And you yourself, if you start reconciling and you start the process of revision, which many of you have done, you would have basically come across a scenario that everything that we are covering in the class, along with the random discussions that we hold, one-on-one discussions that we have in the class, we end up covering a wide gamut of issues. Many of them you won't find ever mentioned in the books also. So that is why, again, I would urge you, see, if you have a kind of an urge inside, if you have that kind of a feeling inside that you need to go through various books, go through various books, whatever books that you like. But then again, I would say sticking to the PPTs and ARMs, for the current affairs till now, along with the portion of the current affairs that have happened for the past 4 to 5 months, that will be more than sufficient for your coverage. Okay. Yes, Indian Express, the UPSC special has got a good coverage, and but so does Hindu. So any of the newspaper that you are following is sufficient for that matter. Okay, and any of the doubts, lingering doubts that you have till now, anything which is concerning all of you, that I don't know how this will be covered, or I don't know how to approach that, please do feel free to ask about that or send a doubt to us, because chances are that today, tomorrow, you might develop a particular kind of a doubt by tomorrow, and tomorrow's class end, you might develop a certain doubt. So please, by tomorrow EOD, that is end of day tomorrow, do send over a mail writing whichever doubt that you have. Send a mail to IS Live. Okay. Now we continue with the portion of biodiversity. Now this is a particular portion which is mostly going to be relevant for your prelims examination. Now in this portion, we are going to also cover the portion of international conventions. So for your prelims here, what is relevant, I'll write it down so that it is easier for you to revise. So basically in this, Chandrasekhar, we are very trying really hard to get it done this month itself. If not, then probably in the coming days. So here, B Rama, that is what I told you, that the team had been trying to contact you. And the team was unable to contact you. So in the mail also, I think Sarmat sir has also written that do provide your alternative contact number in the mail also. And then accordingly, the team has been made aware of that issue, and the team is actively trying to get in touch with you. Provide an alternative number, and accordingly, the team will get in touch. Please do reply in that same mail chain which is going on. Okay. Now, yes, Vivek, I got your mail about the IFOS optional subject. Now, see, for me to suggest to you that which kind of optional subject that you take will be a kind of a preposterous move from my side, and for you also to blindly follow that, obviously, I hope you understand, is not going to be very judicious move on your side. So what I would recommend to you is that, see, in the optional portion for FOS, forest services, there is you don't need to go into such great depths, right? So even a shallow level of awareness and an analysis of the previous year question is more than sufficient. So what I would rather suggest to you is that for these optionals for forest services, look at the requirement of the syllabus as per the notification, right? You have few of the very frequently chosen optional subjects such as geology, agriculture is one of the other options that people choose quite often. Now, try to find a convergence with your portion of general studies, but more than that, analyze the PYQs, the previous year questions of FOS, and that in itself will give you a better clue about which optional is going to be better for you. Okay, but please understand that, for example, in civil services, the depth that is required for the optional, it is not that kind of a proficiency. Having said that, in the forest services, the GS portion is pretty easy. In the mains examination, the GS portion is comparatively easy if you have prepared quite well for the civil services examination, in the sense that your preparation is up to the level that you can qualify to the civil services examination. You will find that the forest services examination, the GS portion is comparatively easier. Right. So because forest services, they tend to eliminate the candidates in the prelims itself. That is why for the forest services, the cutoff is generally 10 marks higher, 10 to 12 marks higher as compared to the civil services cutoff. Okay. Is it necessary to learn all national parks and biodiversity zone? If, let's suppose, I tell you it is necessary, will you start learning all the national parks? So apply your logic here, my dear friend Gulam. So it is not the case that if you learn all the national parks and wildlife sanctuaries and the tiger reserves and the biosphere reserves and the Ramsar sites and the elephant reserves, so if you start learning all of this, then you will also be learning about the critically endangered species in India. Now, if you start learning all of this, you easily have a list of around 900 names that you will need to be learning around. So that is not practical. And eventually you are learning them for what? Maybe one question in the prelims. So for those 900 names that you will ratify, you will spend easily around 1 month. In order to ensure that it sticks to your memory, you will be spending around 1 month in that. And that too, for maybe one question might be asked, or it won't be asked at all. So rather than that, what I would tell you is that I will provide you with the name, with the website link, the government website, where all the updated lists are there, along with the portion of current affairs. Whenever a new national park or a wildlife sanctuary comes in news, or even an existing wildlife sanctuary or a national park is in news, just take a look at their location. And once you take a look at their location, automatically, because by now you would have studied the portion of geography, you would be able to also deduce what kind of vegetation that you find in that region. Right. For example, if you consider a national park or a wildlife sanctuary which is situated in northern portion of Bengal, and or for example, Nanda Devi Biosphere Reserve, which is situated in the region of Uttarakhand. Now, you do know that around Nanda Devi, what kind of conditions would exist? That near the base of the mountainous system, you will have a very kind of a dense deciduous forest kind of a thing. And then slowly and steadily, grassland and alpine ecosystem, everything that you will be able to observe there. So that deduction, more than sufficient. So any national park, any wildlife sanctuary, any new Ramsar site, when they start appearing in news, immediately do one thing: take a look at its location, where it is located, in which particular state it is located, in which region of the country is it located. And then automatically, with the passage of time, you will be able to comprehend that, okay, for example, in the Nilgiri you will also find the sloth bear, whereas in the region of let's suppose Nanda Devi, you might find the presence of brown bear. So that deduction will come automatically with the passage of time, as you are more well versed with the basic concepts here, that what are the conditions of habitat, what is the issue of fragmentation of habitat, etc. So that is better. Okay. uh, Nagentran, there should not be any reason why that should be the case. If that is the case, send it over to me. We'll take a look. So Vivek, I hope your query is now resolved. I hope you now understand. And then, is it better to practice PYQs with new option? No. PYQs, why do you practice PYQs? The concept of practicing PYQs is missed by the very many candidates, because they think that by practicing the PYQs, you are in a way thinking that that question will be repeated by UPSC. That is a very rare case scenario. PYQs are practiced just to understand the language that UPSC uses to confuse the candidates. That is the purpose of PYQs. Other than that, the areas which UPSC will tend to focus, that in any topic, what is the level of detailing that I need to go into, or is there a new fact that UPSC has asked? If it is a very factual question, ignore it. There is no point delving into a very factual kind of a question, because every year those facts, the different facts can always come, right? But if there is a kind of a static question, then the PYQs help you understand the trend, the language pattern. That is very important to understand. Okay, right. We will talk about what is the difference between a national park and wildlife sanctuary, etc. We'll talk about it today. Okay, right. Now, after this, let's continue. Let's talk about the portions which are relevant, first of all, for your prelims. So for your prelims, you'll find types of biodiversity, then after that, what do we understand by keystone species, classification of species, biodiversity hotspots. Sundaresh, in that case, older NCRTs would be sufficient. Hotspots. Yes, Prashant, in that case, it can be a good optional strategy. Mega diverse countries. Then after that, mass extinctions. Then after that, the topic of, let's suppose, international conventions. Now, in these international conventions, we are going to talk about Convention on Biological Diversity, Convention on Migratory Species, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, and international bodies. In the mains examination, you can find questions with an orientation towards threat to biodiversity, then international conventions, then after that, in that, CBD and sites, they are the important ones. Okay. These are the portions which can be asked from this area from the mains perspective. Okay, so that is basically in the portion of biodiversity, these are important. Now, when we talk about biodiversity, what do we exactly mean by that? What is the connotation of that? So it is basically the diversity of various different kinds of species, organisms, populations, which exist across the planet. Across the planet, we do know that you have different types of ecosystems. And in every ecosystem, you have a wide variety of species. Now, even amongst the species, you have genetic diversity. For example, let's suppose if you consider the lion population, you will have the Asiatic lion, you will also have the African lion, right? If you talk about, they are of the same species but different genetics. When you talk about the tiger population, you have the Royal Bengal tiger, you have the Sumatran tiger, you have the Siberian or Amur tiger. So these are again species, variety of species, genetic variety. Then, for example, in elephant population, we have the Asian elephant, the African elephant, and we also have a sub-variety in Sumatran elephant. So that again is a variety of species here. So these are the portions of biodiversity. Now, when we talk about the scales of biodiversity, here, in this case, when we talk about the elements of the different types of diversity, you have different forms of biodiversity. For example, the ecological diversity. What does ecological diversity represent? Ecological diversity for any area represents the, as the name in itself suggests, that a variety of different types of terrestrial aquatic ecosystems that you find in an area. For example, let's suppose if we talk about the southern part of the country. Now, in the southern part of the country, you will find very dense forest also. In the region, for example, in western part of Tamil Nadu, in northern portion of Karnataka, in the western part of Andhra Pradesh, you will also find a kind of a tropical grassland-like structure to be in existence. That will also be there, isn't it? Then, for example, when you talk about the region in let's suppose in the coastal areas, you have the coastal ecosystem which is also present. You will have backwaters also, saline lake also. So these are all different varieties of ecosystems which are in existence. So that is basically the ecological diversity. So it talks about the variety of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems found in any area. Now, ecological diversity is very important because greater the ecological diversity, more number of species and organisms will be able to inhabit that area, will be able to live in that region. Greater the amount of different types of ecology which are in existence, more is the variety of species, more are the different types of interactions, etc., which will be in existence. Right? Now, here, then you have the species diversity. What is the species diversity? Now, in the case of species diversity, in any particular area, you will have a variety of species. For example, you will have deer, you will have tigers, you will have leopards, you will have various different kinds of species, elephants, etc., which are in existence. Now, that diversity tells you about the functionality of the ecosystem, right? About how viable the ecosystem is. Let's suppose in any particular ecosystem, you have only one linear food chain mechanism which exists. Let's suppose you have only one linear food chain mechanism which exists. Now, in that case, if at any point of stage of that food chain, if any of the species, let's suppose, is threatened, dies due to a disease or anything, or is hunted down, then the entire ecosystem will crumble. That is why greater the species diversity which is present, better it is. Okay, better it is not only for the survival, but also the future existence and the thriving part of the ecosystem also. So that is basically the case of the species diversity, the number and abundance of species present in different communities. Then you have genetic diversity. As I told you, in the same species, what is the variety of genetics that you have? Now, that is important for survival. For example, when we talk about the case of, let's suppose, you talk about Asiatic lions. Now, Asiatic lions at one point of time were spread across the region of South Asia, West Asia, in all these areas. Even in India, they were spread across central India, some parts of southern India. So lions could be naturally found in that area. But now the entire Asiatic lion population is restricted where? In the region of Gir forest, around few of the districts in Gujarat. That's it. Right? Around the region, around Junagadh, Rajkot, that is the area where you will find the lion population, nowhere else. Now, think about it. If there is a kind of a disease which impacts that population, now every organism of that population will have the same genetics, they will have the same vulnerabilities. So if that disease manages to wipe out the population of the lions in the region of Gir in Gujarat, then virtually in one swipe, you will not have any lion population in that area at all. Right? For example, in the year 1994, when you talk about it, in 1994, you basically had in Tanzania, the Serengeti region in Tanzania is also very rich, abundantly rich in terms of its biodiversity. Tanzania in the Serengeti region is dominated by the African lions. Now there you had a disease which is referred to as CDV, that is canine distemper virus. Now, this canine distemper virus, it impacted the population of African lions. And within 1 year, it claimed the lives of 1,000 African lions in that area. Right? Around 1,000 lions were immediately, basically, they died. They could not survive the attack of this disease. So here, if you have a genetic diversity, the survivability of the species becomes much more viable. The species, they are not put at that significant amount of risk. So here, claimed the lives of 1,000 African lions. In fact, this is the reason why, for example, in India, we don't have the genetic diversity for the lions. We have only one kind of lion species which are present in India. That is the reason why the government, the central government, for a very long time, for decades now, the ministry has been planning to relocate the lions from the region of Gir forest in Gujarat. The Gujarat government has always been persuasively against that lion relocation because they feel that it is part of that identity, part of that cultural tradition in Gujarat, that Gujarat is very much associated with the lion population for a long period of time. So that is why the Gujarat government is very reluctant. The matter has been dragged to the doorsteps of Supreme Court multiple amount of times. Gujarat government has appealed, Madhya Pradesh government has appealed, but basically this is the reason why the government is trying to relocate the lions from Gir. Because if, let's suppose, an untoward incident, a natural disaster strikes that area, at one go, all the species having the same genetics will have the same vulnerabilities. At one go, we can basically be looking at the mass extinction of the lions. So the government has been planning to relocate because we only have Asiatic lions. Let's relocate them to far off places so that even if one population is at risk, the other population can be conserved. And this is the reason during the time of the COVID pandemic, after the second wave, a massive panic struck the forest officials because they found out that even lions could contract the COVID virus in certain cases. It was found out that they have the vulnerabilities to COVID virus. So that immediately raised the possibility that if that COVID virus, given how communicable it is, how transmissible it is, that can basically transmit to the entire population, impact the entire population. So that is why we need to relocate the lions, right? And that is the basic concept of Project Lion that the government has initiated. Then you also have what is known as functional diversity that is present in any ecosystem in any particular area. When we talk about functional biodiversity, we are talking about the different functionalities, the various different types of functionalities in existence. Okay, so biological and chemical processes as energy flow and matter recycling, which is required for the survivability of species, communities, and ecosystems, that is basically required. So that functional diversity, greater the functionalities which occur in the ecosystem, means more robust and resilient the ecosystem will be. More robust, resilient, and reliable the transfer of energy, the flow of energy in that region is going to be. So that is basically, these are the various different elements of diversity which exist in the nature. But in any particular place, for different places, for example, if you talk about, let's suppose, the western part of Western Ghats, and then you compare it to western part of Rajasthan, right? Now, easily we can come to a conclusion that in the western portion of Western Ghats, the dense forested area, you will have much greater amount of biodiversity which is living as compared to the Thar desert in western part of Rajasthan, isn't it? So that is where we have to understand that this diversity which does exist is different from one region to another, the species diversity, etc. And that brings us to the concept of the scales of diversity, that how much diverse a particular area is. So you have three measures of the scale of diversity: alpha diversity, beta diversity, and gamma diversity. What are they? So alpha diversity, defined as the mean diversity of species in different sites or habitats within a particular local scale. Okay, within a local area, within a particular ecosystem, how many different types of species are present in that area? That is alpha diversity. Okay, so for example, in a region you have snakes, insect species, herbivores, carnivores, all of them are present, monkeys, birds, everything is present, means it is very diverse, means the alpha diversity of that region is very high, right? For example, if you talk about the western part of Rajasthan, the Thar desert area, you'll find presence of certain types of different types of lizards, certain types of reptiles, and few kinds of birds, etc. So there the alpha diversity is less. So alpha diversity is the mean diversity of species in different sites or habitats at a local scale. Then beta diversity. What is beta diversity? It describes the diversity comparison of the species diversity between two communities or two different ecosystems. Okay, as I told you, that let's suppose if you are going to compare the biodiversity present in the region of Karnataka coastline, and if you are going to compare it with, let's suppose, the region of Ladakh, obviously Karnataka coastline will have much greater amount of diversity. So that comparison is beta diversity. When you carry out the beta diversity, you are comparing two different ecosystems. Then what is gamma diversity? Gamma diversity is basically total species diversity in a large landscape, in a kind of a biome. Let's suppose in that entire tropical grassland in one area, and you compare it to the dense rainforest in one area, it will have multiple different ecosystems within it, right? It will have some amount of forest, some amount of grassland, some amount of aquatic conditions, etc. All different kinds of ecosystems. So multiple ecosystems in one landscape, multiple ecosystems in another landscape, you compare them, you arrive at a gamma diversity. So this is the schematic representation of it. So let's suppose here you have landscape AB, landscape CD. So basically, within that you will have multiple different ecosystems. So let's suppose within that, if you compare the diversity of species in one particular ecosystem, how many different diverse kind of species exist in one ecosystem, that is your alpha diversity. This is the measure of alpha diversity. If you compare the diversity between the different sites, that is what will be the beta diversity, right? If you are comparing it between the sites, it is the beta diversity. And let's suppose you are comparing the diversity between the different landscapes, that is what is known as gamma diversity. Okay, if you are able to compare that, what is the diversity between the various different large biomes, that is what is the gamma diversity. So these are the various different scales of diversity. If a landscape has only one ecosystem, then we won't consider it to be a landscape, is it, Kumari? In that case, it is only the ecosystem that we are considering. A larger landscape here refers to a larger area having multiple different types of ecosystems. That is what makes a landscape that is different from an ecosystem. It will have multiple ecosystems in existence. Multiple ecosystems in existence. Okay. Otherwise, it is only about the alpha diversity in that case, right? So that is basically the different scales of diversity. These are the various different, yes, landscapes are here similar to biomes. In that case, you can consider the large landscape, Abhijit, to be very similar to biomes. Alpha decay, beta and gamma decay, they are different thing altogether. You are now moving into the portion of science now. That is about radioactivity that you are talking about. That is completely different. Just because alpha is used, please don't think that everything is the same in that case. That is very different. Now, when we talk about, after that we come to the classification of the species based upon their utility, their functionality, and their role that they play in the larger ecosystem. You have a variety of species. You have the indicator species, you have the keystone species, you have the flagship species, and the foundation species. What are they? So when we talk about indicator species, they will give you an idea about the health of the ecosystem in any particular region. They are indicators of the health of the ecosystem. For example, if let's suppose in a marine ecosystem or a marine environment, let's suppose there is a lot of pollution. Now, the coral reefs won't be able to survive in that kind of an environment. They won't be able to last or sustain themselves in that kind of an ecosystem, isn't it? So the coral bleaching will happen. So that in itself will give you an idea that, okay, this ecosystem is polluted. So you have an indicator of that. For example, when we consider lichens, now, when the air is very polluted, you have sulfur dioxide, etc., pretty dominantly present in the atmosphere, lichens won't grow. So, lichens will start to disappear from that area. That again will give you an idea about the health of the air, right? So, then, for example, let's suppose peregrine falcons. So peregrine falcons, they basically consume the small rodents and the small species. Now there, if let's suppose the rodents are consuming the plants and the crops which are laden with pesticides, the falcon population will start dying. They will start reducing in numbers. And you have an idea that, okay, the pesticide load is very high. So these are the species which give you an idea about the health of the ecosystem. Okay. Indicate the health of the ecosystem. They end up indicating or highlighting the health of the ecosystem. Then, for example, the keystone species. What is a keystone? Keystone is a term that is used for architectural, in engineering and the architectural design, where basically when you take a look at the older buildings or many of the contemporary buildings also, you'll find that many of the pillars and the weight of the building is actually falling on one pillar or one stone. Now, if you remove that stone, it might happen that the entire building can come crumbling down. So in older days, these keystones, they were very important in all the various forms of architecture, Victorian architecture, etc. In order to, basically, you had very heavy stone, a very large and a heavy stone, which would take the weight of the entire structure. So if you would remove the keystone, or if the keystone would get damaged, the entire building would come crumbling down. Similarly, you have certain species which are so very important for the survivability of the ecosystem that if those species, they move out from the ecosystem, or let's suppose they get extinct from that ecosystem, the entire ecosystem can come crumbling down under its own weight, right? So they are very important for the survivability of the ecosystem. For example, tiger population in a region where you don't have other apex predators. If, let's suppose, the tigers, they are extinct, the tigers, they are hunted down, then suddenly the herbivore population will explode, because now there is no check on their population. So the herbivore population will explode. And when the herbivore population significantly explodes, then what will happen? As a result of that, as a consequence of that, the grasses, the green plants, and their availability, that is at risk. That is always going to be at risk, right? So that is where the impact will be very significant. So that is basically the case of the keystone species here. So that is, they are important for the viability. Important for viability of an ecosystem. Okay, the survivability of these species is very, very important for the entire ecosystem to last well. Okay, that is the case of keystone species like tiger. Elephants also, in certain cases, they serve as the keystone species, particularly in the grassland ecosystem. Now, elephants, they are known as the gardeners of the nature, right? Because these elephants, particularly in the region of the grassland, what happens is that in these regions of the grasslands, generally the conditions are very, very dry, right? Now, these elephants, what they do is that basically they will also trample down the trees in order to get the soft core of the tree trunk, in order to extract any amount of water which they can from that area, right? Now, these elephants ensure that the grassland ecosystem is maintained under the weight of their body. Many of the small budding trees, they are unable to grow. Otherwise, that grassland ecosystem would be converted into a kind of a forested ecosystem, where now it is not bad to have a forested ecosystem, but the species of the grassland ecosystem won't be able to survive there, right? Now, immediately after it starts raining, the entire grassland ecosystem basically floods with the grasses. Everywhere you will have wild growth of grasses. Many of the species are unable to move through such dense vegetation. But the elephants, because they are tall enough, because they are bulky enough, they are able to move through the grasses. And not only able to move, they will basically, with the help of their trunks, uproot large quantity of grasses at one go, which some of them they will consume, some of them they will throw on the sides. Now they create the paths, and under the weight of the body, some small puddles will be created, which will be important for the survivability of many of the amphibians. Many of the species such as frogs, etc., they will only lay their eggs in these small puddles of water. So imagine in these grassland ecosystem, if there would not have been the elephants in existence, the frogs would have to go to the nearest watering hole, which is occupied by all different kinds of animals, and the survivability of the young tadpoles would be very, very difficult. That is why the elephants are known as the gardeners of the natural gardeners of the ecosystem. Then you have the flagship species. Flagship. These are basically those particular species which, over a period of time, they have presumed a larger image. They convey a larger meaning of conservation, protection, etc. They have become mascots for conservation of, or they are generally associated with a kind of an ecosystem, right? So for example, when you take a look at the giant pandas, who basically consume a lot of bamboo. So that again is an indicator of. So when you take a look at the pandas, you get a larger viewpoint or a larger understanding of conservation of species, because the pandas are used as mascots for WWF and many other international organizations for the point of conservation. When you take a look at elephants, right? Many of the times, elephants are used as a symbol or a mascot for anti poaching activities, because elephants have been poached and hunted so significantly for their tusks, for the ivory. That is where the image of elephants are used everywhere. So when you take a look at an image of an elephant along with the natural ecosystem, that is used to signify anti-poaching activities in certain cases, conservation of species in larger scenario. So these are the species which assume a larger role for conservation protection of species. Okay, that is flagship. They convey a larger meaning. Then you have foundation. Foundation species are those which lay the groundwork, the basic groundwork for the establishment of that ecosystem in that area. For example, when, let's suppose, we talk about the corals. Now in a marine ecosystem, if you don't have corals, then the biodiversity will appear to be very different, very, very different. But as soon as the corals and the reef building starts, you have large amount of corals which start living in that area. What is the consequence that you will find? The consequence will be that these corals and these species of corals, they will provide shelter, food to different types of fishes, different types of uh, animals or species of marine animals, marine organisms which live on the seafloor. So they establish the entire foundation for the ecosystem. Those are known as foundation species. So this is the variation, the classification of the species here. So indicator species. So these give you an idea about the health of the ecosystem. Examples include crayfish as indicators of freshwater quality, right? Corals as indicators of marine processes such as siltation, seawater rise, temperature change, etc. Peregrine falcons as indicators of pesticide loads. Lichens can be used as air pollution indicators. This is your lichen, right? Especially the concentration of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. If it goes higher, then that means you won't have the lichen population surviving anymore. So that is basically your indicator species. When we talk about the keystone species is that organism that helps define the entire ecosystem and its survivability. The removal of that organism basically can mean the ecosystem won't be able to survive. So without its keystone species, the ecosystem would be dramatically different or cease to exist altogether. If the species were to disappear from the ecosystem, no other species would be able to fill its ecological niche or its biological role that it plays in the entire ecosystem. So that is basically the condition of a keystone species. Example, you can always take the case of tiger, elephants, etc. Example, tiger, elephants, etc. Okay. Now, then after that, flagship species. So flagship species, they act as a symbol for an environmental habitat, movement, campaign, or issue. They can be mascots for the entire ecosystem, right? For example, panda population. Now, pandas, they are used basically as mascots for World Wildlife Fund for nature conservation, right? Elephants, they are used as a mascot, as a conveyor of the meaning, for example, of anti-poaching activities, even as the case with the tigers. So these are basically flagship example. You can have giant pandas, even koala bear, for example. Koalas, then, for example, elephants, tigers, not all tiger, but Bengal tiger, kangaroo also in certain cases. Yes, correct. So that is your flagship species. Okay. So Tanmay, Priyanshu, Samiksha, and Chituri. I hope that flagship species is now clear. And Vivek, I hope the flagship species is now clear. Yes? Okay, perfect. Now then we have the foundation species. Foundation species, they play a major role in creating a or maintaining a kind of a habitat. They can modify the habitat in that area. Corals are one of the examples. Now these corals, they grow as in a colony of thousands, they build reefs, and millions of individual polyps are what you find. And these rocky exoskeletons of these polyps create enormous structure or coral reefs, and they modify the entire ecosystem around them for a long period of time. For example, as soon as you had the planet where the air started becoming cleaner, slightly cleaner, then immediately you had lichens which came into existence. Now, lichens came into existence because the atmosphere at that point of time was so very hostile. It could not support any of the larger plants or animals. Obviously, they had not come into existence. So that is why lichens, which are basically a symbiotic existence between the fungus and the algae, they started coming into existence because an individual plant could not survive the early atmosphere. By early atmosphere, I'm still talking about 500, 600 million years back, right? I'm not talking about billions of years ago. Around 600 million years back, around at that point of time, lichens, they started dominating. Now, because a single plant could not withstand the tough conditions, rocks were present, damp rocks, and basically you had the entire planet having only rocky structure, no soil formation. Right. Now, those lichens, they laid the slight foundation, and after that, for millions of years, the entire planet was covered in mosses. Mosses have the basically you would have seen in a case of a damp rock in your region also. In a region, let's suppose in any area near you, let's suppose in a rock, if there is a consistent seepage of water on the rock, you will observe that greenish growth. Those are your mosses. Now, mosses are also a species of plants having a microscopic thin layer of leaves. Now, these mosses at one point of time, they covered the entirety of the landscape, and that basically softened the rock, and that created condition for the existence of other kind of species also. They created soil conditions also. So they laid the foundation of that. So at one point of time, even mosses, they have played the role of foundation species. Okay, right? So that is basically the case of the classification of these species. Then we come to the ecosystem engineers. What are these? So out there in the nature, the various species, as they have evolved, as they have come into existence, they basically have also developed the ability to modify the ecosystem around them in order to create the ideal habitat for them. Right. So some of the species, they modify their own biological activity in order to shape the ecosystem around. Some of the species, they modify the ecosystem from the outside. So when we talk about ecosystem engineers, they modify, create, and they can even basically maintain the various different types of habitats. Now, ecosystem engineers modify their habitats through their own biology sometimes, or by physically changing the biotic and abiotic factors of an ecosystem. if they are able to change the ecosystem by changing their own internal biology, internal morphology. That is what is referred to as autogenic engineers, right? They modify the environment by modifying their own biology. That is your autogenic engineer. For example, let's suppose we consider a small plant. Let's suppose we consider a small plant. Okay. Now, when the plant is very small, what kind of species will be present here? Will be few of the insects, maybe rodents. That's it. Maybe few of the flies here and there. That's it. That is the ecosystem it will be able to support, right? As this plant grows into a tree, it develops into a kind of a tree-like structure. Let's suppose this plant grows and develops itself into a kind of a large tree. Now, in this case, you will find birds also living there. You'll find in certain cases even snakes living there, various different types of parasites, bugs, insects, everything will be living here. So we can say that the ecosystem that it will be able to support has drastically changed. The ecosystem in this area also has drastically changed, be it the microbes in the soil. They will be different as compared to the sapling stage, isn't it? But has that change of ecosystem happened? Because of plant's own internal biology. The plant has gotten converted into a tree. Not all the plants have the ability to do so. You will find many of the small shrubs and herbs, they remain of this small height itself. Somehow they will reproduce and they will propagate the young ones, and that is when they will die. But few of the plants, they are able to, few of the trees species from their young age to the older age, they will be able to witness a much significant variety. For example, a banyan tree. When you plant a small banyan sapling, observe the ecosystem around it, it is very fragile. But a well-grown banyan tree, a well-established banyan tree, will be able to support many different types of ecosystem, many different types of varieties of life within itself, right? So they are able to modify the various different types of, they are able to modify their own biology, and by that they will be able to shape the different kinds of species also. So that is what is autogenic engineer. This is what is known as autogenic engineers. They modify their own biology to shape the ecosystem around them. That is what is known as an autogenic engineer. Then, for example, you have few of the species which will modify their ecosystem of the surrounding, and then accordingly they will create their own specific kind of a habitat. So the change physically, they are able to change the biotic and abiotic factors around them. One of the ideal examples of this is basically the beavers. The beavers, they are able to survive in a kind of a clear water, right? Freshwater ecosystem is where the beavers will be able to survive. Now, at the time that they are going to reproduce, at the time when they have to raise their young ones, they want water which is very rich in nutrients, right? Now, that is generally not available in the case of a flowing water. The flowing water won't be able to trap many of the nutrients. So what do? They physically, they build a dam. They are very smart in that way. Let's suppose you have a river which is flowing like this. Let's suppose a river movement is like this. Now the beavers, they are very smart to analyze where is it that I will create an obstruction that a standing water pool is created. So they will bring parts of certain bricks, construction material, leaves, branches, wood, anything that they can find, even mud. They will be able to accumulate mud, and they create a kind of a dam like structure. so that in that entire area, the entire region gets flooded. That entire region gets flooded. Now that region, when it gets flooded, some amount of water might percolate down the street. Some small amount of water might percolate, but most of the water will accumulate here. So the life quality in that area, the biotic, abiotic factors in that area, everything changes. And that is the condition that they use for shaping their ecosystem and raise their young ones. These are very infamously what are referred to as beaver dams, right? Beaver dams. By constructing these beaver dams, they are able to significantly modify the ecosystem for their young ones, for raising their young ones. And in that way, they are significantly much smarter as well. So that is the case with allogenic engineers. Example, beavers. Okay. Then, when we talk about invasive alien species, they are oftentimes referred to as ecosystem engineers also. But what do we mean by invasive alien species? Those are the kind of species which are not naturally found in an area. They might have been introduced into that region, and then their population has thrived and basically ends up modifying the ecosystem around them. So, in a kind of a competitive manner, they modify the ecosystem in such a way that only they will be able to survive. For example, take the case of few of the species. Now, they generally will observe invasive alien species, they modify the ecosystem, and they ensure their survivability by a process of amensalism. Remember the species interrelation that we had, amensalism, commensalism, etc. So basically, they are able to modify themselves. So that is the case of the invasive alien species. So example, take the case of, yes, very good, Femina. Take the case of Lantana camara. Now, Lantana camara is a kind of a plant species that most of us would have encountered from our childhood days around us. For example, you would have come across many of the small bushy kind of growth where these small bushes of the plants, they have multicolored leaves, where they have multicolored flowers rather. They will have many of the small flowers, red, white, yellow, bluish, all the kind of multicolored small flowers, they start growing in these bushes, right? Now that is an invasive species. Now when that species basically is introduced in an area, immediately they grow very quickly, and they form a very bushy growth, a kind of a thick bushy growth. And in that kind of a thick bushy growth, sunlight won't be able to percolate to the ground surface. Okay, as the sunlight is not able to percolate to the ground surface, the other plants in that region won't be able to grow. So the other plants will be harmed in that case. And again, more bushes of Lantana camara will keep on expanding because their rate of growth is very high. Okay, and they will be modifying the ecosystem in such a way where sunlight is not available on the ground very easily. They are able to modify themselves so that only they can survive. Right? For example, if you consider Ravi, yes, that is also what is known as in the local lingo as putus, yes. So, for example, even when you consider the species such as red-eared slider turtle, now these are small exotic species that basically are imported from South American region, and they are basically imported for to keep in household aquariums, etc. But once they have very sharp claws, by the way. Once they start growing in size, they will basically start harming the other species, and they will basically break the shell of the other turtle species, eventually weeding out the competition. Right? So Lantana camara. Then you can take the a case of another one of them, eucalyptus Yes, Kamlesh, that can also be considered. Eucalyptus, for example, eucalyptus is originated from where? It is the native of the region of Australia, right? Now, eucalyptus was actually introduced here in order to bring about a kind of a situation where they could absorb excess moisture. That is how eucalyptus was introduced. Now, this eucalyptus, basically, when you introduce them into any area, they grow very quickly and they grow very tall. But they will absorb the soil moisture in the surrounding area very efficiently well. Now, what that means, it renders the region green. It renders the region very dry because the roots will start absorbing all the excess moisture that it can. It renders the region very dry. So the other native species of that area, they won't be able to survive, right? So only the species of eucalyptus will be able to be present there. That is why, in general, if you have noticed, you will find that initially, if you have few of the trees of eucalyptus in a forest, slowly and steadily, the entire forest is taken over by the eucalyptus itself, right? For example, eucalyptus around 200 years back was introduced in the region of Udagamandalam or Uti in order to absorb the excessive moisture present in the soil there because the Nilgiris would receive heavy rains. Now that eucalyptus spread over to the region of Western Tamil Nadu. Now Western Tamil Nadu is not that rainier. So Western Tamil Nadu, the eucalyptus plants, they have rendered that region very dry. So the native species are unable to survive. So the western portion of Tamil Nadu, which historically was a forested area, has now been converted into a thorny kind of a forest. So they are able to modify the ecosystem around them. That is the characteristic of the invasive species. California python, yes, and it is basically the Burmese python, yes. Water hyacinth is one of those. Water hyacinth is also what is referred to as the terror of Bengal. Okay, because when we talk about water hyacinth, it is also what is referred to as the terror of Bengal. Because what this water hyacinth does, it starts absorb. It basically is a floating kind of a flora, and it is present over the water. Now they grow again very quickly. Now, over a very short span of time, this water hyacinth that reproduces so very quickly, grows very quickly, it will cover the entire pond or a lake ecosystem with the growth of this only water hyacinth region. As a result of that, the other plants which would be growing at the base of the pond, they won't receive sunlight at all. They will be pushed to extinction, and you will have the ecosystem which will only support water hyacinth. So they are able to modify the ecosystem around them. So most of the invasive alien species that you will find, they will come under the category of ecosystem engineers. Now we come to the causes for the loss of biodiversity. What are the various reasons due to which we experience the loss of biodiversity in various areas? So first of all, you have the habitat loss, right? Habitat loss, the fragmentation and degradation of the habitat. The existing habitat, if it is not of a very good quality, then if it's the ecosystem services that it provides is degrading in terms of its nature, then obviously you will basically find that the species won't be able to survive there, right? So for example, infrastructure building infrastructure building agricultural extension, what it has done, the existing habitat. Which diagram are you talking about, Vivek? Which diagram are you talking about? This one about the tree, plant getting converted into a tree. This one, the river. It is to tell you that the beavers, they are able to build dams so that they can stop the flow of the fresh water and build an ecosystem of kind of a standing fresh water which is rich in nutrients, where they can grow there, where they can raise their young ones easily well. Then let's suppose when we talk about the biodiversity, any large biodiversity. Let's suppose this is a biodiversity which is used, this is the entire region or the habitat which is used for the for by elephants, for example, right? Elephants, or let's assume tigers. Tigers, they do require a very large aerial coverage. They do require a habitat which is very, very large so that they can have enough amount of energy in them. Now, let's suppose the tigers are using this very, very large area. Now, when we talk about this large area, if you build a highway here, if you build an infrastructure or any kind of a highway, railway line also, so in a way, you have now fragmented the habitat into two smaller parts. So a tiger which is present here has got to do with the small area in itself. That means greater competition, lesser availability of resources, isn't it? This will give rise to more man-animal conflicts also. Eventually, the species, they get threatened. Few of them, they are pushed to death also. Okay, so this leads to lack of availability of food. Availability of food, greater competition, right? Threat of extinction, right? Greater amount of man-animal conflict also. So this is one of the reasons why the species, they are basically declining in numbers. Across the world, you have the destruction of natural habitat which is taking place due to the processes of deforestation for agriculture, for extension of agriculture, for industries, for the building of infrastructure facilities. So, and nowadays in the coastal areas also due to coastal flooding. So you have that loss of biodiversity. Then invasive alien species. Invasive alien species put the other species, the native species, at risk by occupying that space and growing at an ultra fast rate. Okay, so these invasive alien species, they put the other species at risk by growing at a very fast pace. Here you can take the case of Senna spectabilis, you can take the case of the red-eared slider turtle. Yes, Kumari. Weeds can also be considered as an ecosystem engineer. I think someone else had asked this question. Kamlesh, you had asked this question. Yes. So, for example, red-eared slider turtle, then water hyacinth, then lantana camara. No, when I say coastal flooding will lead to the loss of biodiversity, I'm talking about the rise in seawater. When you have a permanent rise in seawater, that leading to a kind of a degradation of the coastal habitat. Okay. Now, pollution is a ever persistent threat, which again leads to the degradation of the kind or the condition of the habitat which is present. Climate change. Climate change also brings about untoward changes or extraordinary dry spells. For example, in many of the tropical grasslands, the dry spell is becoming so very longer. Many of the species are unable to cope up with that. Many of the species are finding it incredibly difficult to survive that. That is where you will find that due to harsh conditionalities, many of the species, they are pushed to newer areas or pushed to different regions where there is again man animal conflict, greater competition, etc. Diseases, We have taken the example of diseases such as the canine distemper virus, which influenced the lion population in Tanzania. So similarly, you can have various different spread of diseases which can basically influence the survivability of the species in an area. So the diseases basically can also end up or consume large amount of biodiversity. Then you have the anthropogenic factor. Now, anthropogenic factor. What are anthropogenic? So, human-based factors or the factors initiated by the human activities or human causes. So, here, in fact, all of these, other than maybe the aspect of few of the diseases, all of these are anthropogenic in nature. Almost all of these, they are anthropogenic in nature. It is basically we humans, we have caused that consequence, or we have caused that situation due to which the species are finding it very hard to survive. One of the easiest example is that of the tiger and the lion population. Now, tiger population is suffering from the case of excessive fragmentation of the habitat. An adult tiger requires a very large territory for its existence. Recently, I don't know if you have read the news reports or not, but it was much publicized last week where a tiger which was radio collared, where you had an installation of a radio collar in the region of Tadoba, the Tadoba protected area, the Tadoba Tiger Reserve in the region of Maharashtra. Now, it was tracked that it covered in a distance of close to around 2,000 kilometers and reached the region of Odisha, right, in order to find its perfect habitat in the region of Simlipal. So think about it that these tigers, and last year you had a similar incident where a tiger in Maharashtra actually ended up covering around 3,000 kilometers to find its habitat. So that is where these tigers, they do require a very large area. It is said that an adult tiger requires an area of close to around 100 square kilometer. 100 square kilometer, you might be able to sustain only two tigers at max. So think about it. 100 square kilometer is a large area that we are talking about. Now, how much area across the country do we have where that is basically unimpacted? Very, very little. In fact, this is the reason why this time Kane Betwa, even in geography optional, you had a question about Betwa River, about pointing the Betwa River, because the Kane Betwa interlinking river project is in that much news. Because why? Because that Kane Betwa interlink is going to lead to the submergence of the Panna Biosphere Reserve. And Panna Biosphere Reserve in Madhya Pradesh is very rich in tiger population. So with the submergence of large areas of Panna Biosphere Reserve, you will again have a fragmentation of the habitat for the tigers. Where will the tigers go? The tigers, if they venture into new territory, they will face competition from the leopards and etc. And again, they will have less food. Because please understand, when we talk about the tigers sitting here in the comfort of your room, basically, when you take a look at the tigers, you think that these are efficient predators, but they are not. They are very significant predatorial species, but they are not very efficient. Every 10 times that they actually go out for a kill, they will be able to have a kill maybe once or twice at max. In the case of the cheetahs, it is also in the same lower case. In the case of lions, also it is very low, right? Because oftentimes the prey that they are hunting, be it the deer, be it the nilgais, anything, now they also are able to, they have over the period of hundreds and thousands and millions of years, they have adapted themselves to escape them, right? So oftentimes they are unable to find food for themselves. So that is why fragmentation of habitat is the worst thing that can happen to them. Okay. Now, you also had a very sad image. It was an image which was shared quite widely, and the newspapers reported it. But I would still say it was a kind of a sad image. Around the region of Ranthambore in Rajasthan, Ranthambore, you have a tiger reserve there. Now, around the region of Ranthambore, the image was taken where you have a 4-lane highway which is built over that area, and you had a tiger which was standing on the side of the road waiting for and looking for the vehicles to pass by so that it can cross the road and enter into the forest on the other side. So think about it. the predicament, the struggle that these species face in order to ensure their survivability. Maybe that tiger would have traveled again hundreds of kilometers to reach that area. So that is where we should never carry out degradation or fragmentation, or the loss of habitat should absolutely never be carried out. Okay? Now, then climate change, for example, is also initiating in many areas across the polar regions, etc. It is leading to the melting of ice. Ice melts very easily. So for polar bears, it has become very difficult for them to hunt now, right? So that is why they have taken to water. But there also, if let's suppose the Arctic ice disappears, where will the polar bears go? So that is where climate change is also a major influence. Then you have the IUCN. Pregnant elephant dying due to consumption of pineapple with firecracker inside. That is, in fact, one of the worst things that you would come across. And that is not even, that won't even come under the category of humanity. It is not, in fact, that kind of a cruelty even the animals don't do, right? Even when we talk about the killer whales which hunt for fun, they also don't endure that kind of a cruelty which we humans are capable of. And sadly, in India, where historically, culturally, traditionally, we have always revered the elephant, the animal population. We have worshipped the animal population. If you take a look at the scriptures that we have had for thousands of years, nowhere will you come across a significant man animal conflict, right? Everywhere it is about harmonious coexistence. But it is very ironic that in this land of nature worship, from this land of nature worship, we have the new generation which is coming up, which is absolutely cruel, right? Take a look at the various events that happen around you, not only for elephants but dogs, for various different kinds of species. That simply wrenches your heart. And prelims test series is free for enrolled students. Yes, it is. Okay. And yes, the peacocks have been killed also. So now we come to the portion of IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. Now, when we talk about IUCN, this was a body which was formed in 1948. And this was an organization which was formed for the prime purpose of carrying out a detailed analysis and detailed study about this loss of habitat, about the threats that the biodiversity faces, about what can be done in order to ensure the survivability of species. Now, they would carry out researches and detailed studies across a wide gamut of areas. That was the work of IUCN. In 1964, in 1964, they came up with a red list. Red list. And that red list would include the various different species and their threat levels that they are facing. Because the world needs to know. Because in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, the world basically witnessed the sudden disappearance of the few species within a blink of an eye. For example, we call the dugongs the sea cow, isn't it? Dugong and manatees, we call them as sea cow. But these dugongs, just to give you the idea, these dugongs where you had the original species of sea cow to be found in the temperate areas, in the region across the coastline of Europe. Now, within the few years of their discovery, within around 30 years since mankind first came to know that you have a species like this, we hunted them into extinction. Right now, you don't have the original sea cow species existent anywhere. Dugong is simply a variety of a genetic variety of that original sea cow. But that original sea cow, which was a herbivore mammal, you don't find to be present because we hunted them into extinction. Right? If proper conservation measures would not have been taken, even the whales would be hunted to extinction. You had the International Whaling Commission, which basically put a ban on that hunting of whales. And even now, you have China, which says that we are not going to adhere to any of these restrictions. We are going to hunt whales whenever we want. So, for that purpose, so that the larger mankind is aware that, okay, this species is facing that kind of a threat level where, let's suppose, they are critically endangered, or they are endangered, or they are threatened, vulnerable. They list the species in this category depending upon what is their population in the wild, what is the level of threat that they are facing in the wild. Okay, so here the list of threatened species has evolved to become the world's most comprehensive information source on the global extinction risk status of animal, fungus, and plant species. So please don't think about it that the red list or the list of the threatened species will include only animals. No. Animals, reptiles, amphibians, plants, and even fungus. You have few of the fungal species which are listed in the portions of being very significantly endangered. So that is the case with IUCN. Now, it is basically the species based upon their threat level, what is their population, the declining population. They are basically categorized into either extinct, if that species is not found anywhere anymore, or extinct in the wild. That means in certain protected areas, in certain zoos, etc., you might find them, but out there in the nature, you won't find them. You had one of these examples of Galapagos turtle, which was for a long period of time would be protected in the zoos, but eventually, when that died, you did not have any of that turtle species out there in the wild anymore, right? Then critically endangered, endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, and so on. Every year, there is a kind of an updation of that list. Every year, maybe certain species, based upon certain newer resources, they are relegated to a condition from critically endangered to endangered, or endangered to critically endangered, depending upon their analysis. For example, take the case of snow leopard. Now, snow leopard is also, by the way, considered to be an indicator species about the health of the mountain ecosystem. Okay, snow leopard is also an indicator. Now, snow leopard is very elusive, a hunter species. You will find, or the spotting of the snow leopard is absolutely very difficult, because their camouflage, the skin color almost resembles the background of the snowy and the Rocky Mountains, almost impossible to spot them. So, earlier, when actual individuals were spotted, it was found out that their numbers are not very high. So they were put under endangered category. But later on, when it was understood, within a couple of years, again a revised study was done. It was found that you have evidences of snow leopard present in the region around Arunachal area also, around the region of Sikkim also, around the region of Jammu Kashmir, Himachal, Ladakh also, and in Central Asia also. Then it was observed that, okay, we don't have the exact number of them, but considering that large landscape, their number could be in tunes of maybe 7 to 8,000. So their status was basically upgraded from endangered to vulnerable. Now snow leopard is in vulnerable category. So every year, as more study and more researchers come into the picture, the species, they change their from critically endangered to endangered to, and so on. Okay. Now, what is the criteria to put a species under the list of critically endangered, endangered, or vulnerable? In that snow area, what do they eat to survive? They eat the ibex, the various different species of tar, right? Various different species of, or mountain goats, in simple terms. Mountain goats, they exist in these mountainous areas, and they basically, they are the ones which are hunted by the snow leopard. Okay. Now, then after that, what is the criteria for basically listing these species into various different categories? So the species listed under critically endangered. Critically endangered means there has been a population decline of 80 to more than 90% over the last 10 years. Okay, population decline of 80 to more than 90% in the last 10 years or 3 generations of the species. It might happen, for example, a species of turtle, for example, might be living for 100 years, let's suppose. So in their 3 generations, we are covering a time span of 300 years. You might have a certain species which has a lifespan of maybe 1 year or 2 years. So in that case, whichever is longer, the period of 10 years or the 3 generations, in that time period, if there has been a population decline of around 80 to 90%, and basically a current population size of fewer than 50 individuals, that is basically put under the category of critically endangered. This criteria is relevant for your prelims in the statement based questions. In the case of statement based questions. Okay, that is the case of critically endangered. What about endangered? When we talk about endangered, so those species which again in the past, either in the past 10 years or in their previous 3 generations, they have experienced a population decline of 50 to 70%, right? And where you have fewer than a population size of fewer than 250 individuals, or there can be other factors also. Other factors are included in all of these. And what are these other factors? Sudden destruction in that habitat. Maybe in their base habitat, there has been sudden destruction. They don't have the food requirement anymore, or a spread of disease has happened. So those are your other factors, but generally, these are the conditions for which or due to which they are put under critically endangered or vulnerable, depending upon what is the rate of the population decline and also what is basically the conditionality of the present size of the population around. Right? If the population size presently is around 1,000 individuals or more, and the population decline has happened to 30 to 50%, it is put under vulnerable category. Okay, so that is how you have the categorization which is done, and every year they are basically put under different criteria. Okay, right? As soon as I write, this is important for prelims, immediately all the antlers and all the feelers, they start raising. Okay, now I have to pay attention. Earlier he was saying something, now he's saying something important for prelims, so please repeat this once again. So basically, this is the criteria of the IUCN list, is that depending upon the decline of population or depending upon what is the size of population present, they are divided into various categories. If the population decline is around 80 to 90% over the past 3 generations or 10 years, critically endangered, decline of 50 to 70%, and if you have lesser than 250 individuals in the wild, it is endangered. Otherwise, it is vulnerable if decline of 30 to 50% and around 1,000 individuals in the wild. Okay, it is the population and the decline rate. Arshdeep, okay, Shiva, some infrastructure projects lead to destruction and fragmentation of ecosystem, but those infrastructure are needed for growth of economy. And during mains and interview, which side I have to stand, whether on economy or environment side? You have to stand on the side of sustainable development, that you have to develop the infrastructure, but ensure, for example, let's suppose the Delhi Mumbai expressway which is being constructed, it has got animal crossings around it, right? It has got many of the underpasses and animal crossing over bridges which are present over there. So that is a kind of a sustainable development. Yeah, do we need to check the recent list? Absolutely. Yes, Kumari, that is correct. Arshdeep, my dear friend, do you want the contact of Rashesh sir? I'm not Rashesh sir, if you are getting confused in that. I'm not that guy. But if you want a contact, then do let me know. Okay. Now here, do you need to learn all these species which are put under critically endangered? The answer is no. Just check on the recent updates which are there, and that recent update will do. Okay, update about the portion of current affairs, that will be more than sufficient. Okay, so we'll do one thing, we'll take a break right now, and we'll come back in 15 minutes, and then we'll continue from this portion. And today will be discussing the PYQs also. Okay, the PYQs associated with this module and the previous modules, we'll hold a discussion for that also, the prelims PYQs in particular. So let's take a break of 15 minutes, and let's be back after 15 minutes. I'll put it in the previous slide. Partnering with various other agencies and other different bodies, international bodies, to bring about the larger issue of conservation into mainstream. Okay, so it has played a role in the key international conventions, for example, Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, World Heritage Convention, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CBD. These conventions we are going to study in significant detail after some time. So IUCN has played that role multiple different amount of times and in numerous different instances. Now in 1980, IUCN, in partnership with the UNEP and the World Wildlife Fund, published the World Conservation Strategy, which was a document that helped define the concept of sustainable development. Again, that is a topic I will pick up very separately tomorrow again, to help you understand what is this concept of sustainable development. And Shiva, you were asking a question about what should be your approach in the interview panel. That is a question which interview board is, particularly those of you who are interested in forest services. Now, in that forest services interview, this is a question which is very frequently asked about whether you should give prominence to economic development or environmental conservation. So there always the middle path of sustainable development is the chosen answer. And IUCN has basically created a role in raising the awareness. Because understand, when we talk about conservation of a particular species, now there are many species that we are not even aware of, which have been threatened and which are critically endangered. But when this issue gets highlighted, when this study comes into existence that, okay, for example, a particular species has got only 50 individuals, that creates a mass awareness. So even the local community of that region won't allow hunting and poaching of that species to happen. Because regardless of anything, as we have seen in our own country, particularly in the case of Project Tiger, is a kind of an evidence in point where the mainstreaming or the dialogue, the mainstreaming of the conversation has brought about an increased measure of conservation. For example, the tiger conservation. Project Tiger was initiated in 1973 itself by late Srimati Indira Gandhi. She initiated the concept of Project Tiger, conservation of tiger species. Now, you know what was the population of tiger in 1973? It was around 1,400 individual tigers. The census was again carried out in 2006. The number came out to be around 1,411. But this time, The difference which was created was everybody was talking about it. That tigers are getting endangered, tigers might go extinct. Everybody talked about it. As a result of that, what happened? Awareness level was so high. Tiger hunting of tiger and killing of tigers and poaching was actually taken looked at as a taboo. Right. Earlier, people would flaunt the tiger skin, and the tiger leather that they would flaunt in their drawing rooms, in their boardrooms, etc. But now, after that conversation that was mainstreamed, that entire paradigm changed. Hunting of tigers became a kind of a criminal act. It was earlier also declared a criminal activity, but now the authorities also put their maximum attention, because now, as you will see, even if a tiger dies due to a natural death, it makes national headlines. If you have a couple of tigers or a tiger which is hunted, it makes national headlines. So from 2006 to now, the latest tiger census, the data which was released earlier this year, what is the population of tigers now in India? Around 3167. So more than doubling of the tiger population has happened within the short span of 15 years. Whereas from 1973 all the way till 2006, 2010, we had almost the same level of tiger population. So that is where the role of agencies and bodies such as IUCN, that is very, very important. Okay. Now, tiger nails as pendant in chains. Yes. Right. No, tigers are not in the red list in India. If you take a look at the critically endangered species in India, now understand, from this time onwards to the time that you appear in the prelims examination in May, in the month of May and June next year, or even year after that, this critically endangered list can go for multiple different changes, multiple different updates. Now, all that you need to do is, before the examination, I would suggest, ideally 1 month before the examination, when you are appearing for the prelims, do take some time out, visit the IUCN website. Yes, Vivek, Brundtland report for sustainable development you have to bring. Now here, do visit the IUCN website, look at the updated list. But please understand that you cannot possibly end up learning all of them. For example, when we talk about the critically endangered, you have the large rock rat or the Elvira rat, Namdafa flying squirrel. Where is Namdafa flying squirrel found? Namdafa flying squirrel is to be found in which area? In the region of Arunachal Pradesh. Very good. That is where you also have the Namdafa Tiger Reserve. Right. So this is a critically endangered species. But over the past few years, their population has started coming back. Then, for example, you even have the Malabar civet, which is a kind of civets are basically those species which look very similar to that kind of a fox, right? And they are nocturnal in nature. Now, there also, because of the encroachment in their natural habitat, they have been facing a lot of destruction. Then rhino, Sumatran rhino and Javan rhino. Then sharks, right? Hawksbill turtle, four-toed river terrapin, right? And then river terrapin, red crown roof turtle, Bengal roof turtle. These are basically the species of turtles also, which are in doubt or which are in significant threat of extinction. Having said that, why I am telling you you won't be able to learn all of them is because, as of the submission by the ministry in the parliament this year itself, 73 species in India are critically endangered. It is no way that you will be able to memorize the 73 species. Under no condition will you be able to learn all of them, right? If you are learning the 73 species, either you have a kind of an eidetic memory, or you have a kind of a system where, or you have a condition where, let's suppose you are only talking about this environment and no other subject is being covered. So this is simply impractical. Only the recent changes that you find, that is something which you have to encapsulate. Okay, so that is basically the species that you find, and here they are critically endangered as per the IUCN. And earlier in 2011 you had 47, now it has increased to 73. 9 species of mammals, 18 bird species, 26 reptiles, 20 amphibians. All of these, they constitute the critically endangered species. Then you have species of plants also. Recent, for example, for this year's prelims, you had the importance of a few of the plant species which were declared, which were discovered in the region of Himalayas, where the plant species were found to have some kind of antioxidants. Now, those were also declared as critically endangered. So whenever these new stories they prop up, and that is something that you will find in the monthly magazines, while you revise the portion of current affairs, you will find it in monthly magazine. Just put an eye out and an ear out for that, and simply ensure that enough amount of revisions are done. That's it. Don't overcomplicate this particular topic. If you pay too much amount of attention in this particular topic in itself, that will also end up backfiring. That will also not give you the desired result. Okay. Now, yes, I agree with you, Aditya. Vivek, why they are found in Arunachal only, not in Uttarakhand? That is because in the region of Arunachal, you have a complex ecosystem in existence where you have the presence of the forest also, dense forest ecosystem also, along with the kind of a variation in altitude. So it is that dense forest with that variation in altitude where they will be able to thrive. In Uttarakhand, you don't find that dense forest anymore, do you? So that is why. Okay. Now we come to the portion of biodiversity hotspots, again relevant for your prelims. Hotspot, biodiversity hotspot means what? Means you have a large concentration of biodiversity in a particular area, large variety of biodiversity which is in existence in any particular area. That is what is a biodiversity hotspot. Okay, so not every region across the world is declared as biodiversity hotspot. You have only few areas which are declared. So there is conditionalities to be met. So that, because when do you declare a region as a biodiversity hotspot? Is when you have to ensure conservation happens, sustainable conservation happens, and also that region is at so much risk that if you don't conserve that area, that hotspot won't survive anymore. So what are the conditions based upon which a region is declared as a biodiversity hotspot? You basically have one of the condition that the region should contain at least 1500 species of vascular plants as endemic. Endemic species means they are naturally found in that area and nowhere else. Right. It should not be the case that you will find that particular tree in Karnataka also, in Andhra Pradesh also, in Maharashtra also, in Odisha also, in Madhya Pradesh. No, only in certain areas and nowhere else. That is endemism. So in that region, you should have at least 1500 species of unique vascular plants. What do we mean by vascular plants? Are we aware of the meaning of vascular plants? No? Very good. Shalu, Ravi. It is basically where, Gaurav, correct, the plant species which have the developed system of xylem and phloem. Okay, good. Sanya, Pallavi, Shiva, Femina, all of you good, correct. So basically, wherever the plants have the well-developed vessel system of xylem and phloem with which they can transport food, materials, and gases also. So that is basically an evolved species of plants, right? So that is a well-established evolved species of plants. So that variety should exist. And also the second conditionality is that region should have witnessed at least 70% of loss of its primary native vegetation. Because only when the vegetation is disturbed will mean that the natural habitat is disturbed. The area where the species would naturally be found, that is destroyed. Okay, so that is where basically these two conditions, if they are fulfilled, if they are met, that is when it is known as, it is classified to be under the portion of biodiversity hotspot. Okay, across the world you have around 36 areas, and this also keeps on changing as the area delegated under biodiversity hotspots. Now think about, as I told you, in these areas you will have wide variety of biodiversity. So think about it, that these 36 areas, they represent only 2.4% of the Earth's land surface. But overall, this 2.4%, they are able to support more than half of the world's plant species as endemics, right? In that 2.4% of the land, you have more than half of the plant species and the vascular plant species in existence, and then nearly 43% of the bird, mammal, amphibian, reptilian species to be found in just 2.4% of the Earth's land surface. So this is spread across the globe. Now, here I understand the immediate concern will be, Chuck, what are the numbers of biodiversity hotspot? What is the condition? Do I need to learn these biodiversity hotspots or not? The answer is across the globe, no. Right? Just have an idea that biodiversity hotspots are also to be found in the region of New Zealand, also in the region of Chile. Why? Because you can easily find a question to be framed, a statement kind of a question to be framed, that biodiversity hotspots across the world are concentrated only in the region of tropics, the tropical areas of the world. Immediately, the answer will be that no, they are present even in the temperate regions of the world. Okay, so the first criteria is 1500 species of vascular plants as endemic, and second criteria is 70% of loss of vegetation should have been experienced. But this particular portion, that is the biodiversity hotspots which are partially or present in India, that is important for your exam. So which are the biodiversity hotspots of India? So in India, you have four of these different biodiversity hotspots which partially lie in the region of the country. So what are those? First is the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot. Himalayan biodiversity hotspot. Now, Himalayan biodiversity hotspot will represent a kind of a mountainous ecosystem, isn't it? Here you will find the presence of conifers also. At the base, you will find the kind of a tropical deciduous, wet, temperate forest, grasslands, all of them you will find in this. So here you will find a variety of different kinds of herbs, plant species, very unique plant species, orchids, you will find lichens, right? So all of them you will find here. Snow leopard, brown bear, these are few of the species that you will find in that biodiversity hotspot. It also spreads furthermore into the region of Nepal also, into the territory of Bhutan also, into portions of southern China also. That is where the biodiversity hotspot is spread over. Then you have the Indo-Burma hotspot. Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. Now, what is that Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot? It is a kind of a dense forest ecosystem having mountains and hills in between. Very dense forest. Now, there you will find species, for example, you will find certain types of flamingos, you will find the presence of elephants, you will find gibbon species, right? All of them you will find there. Then you will find hornbills. They will also be found in this area. This was also a prominent question asked in this year's Forest Services interview. In the Forest Services interview, they also asked this question. For example, hornbill, where do you find in the country? So if you are aware, for example, you have in the northeastern region, you have the Great Hornbill Festival, which is celebrated. If you are able to interrelate it, as I told you, across the country, the cultural tradition for hundreds and thousand years has been to celebrate the biodiversity and to celebrate the wildlife. That has been the cultural tradition across the country. So you can pick up the strands from the various cultural festivities, the belief systems in the various different areas, and you will get an idea about what kind of species that you find and what are the practices followed. That in itself will be much more significantly value added. Then the other one is the Western Ghats and the region of Sri Lanka. Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. Now, this represents a dense forest ecosystem along with the regions which have received typically, just like the Indo-Burma, very heavy occurrence of rainfall, very heavy occurrence of rainfall in this area. So you'll find a lot of reptilian species, mangroves of various kind you will find, unique species of trees you will find, right? So this is again, here also you'll find various different species for example, monkeys. You will find of various different kinds living there, different types of birds you'll find to be in existence in this area. And then you have also the Sundaland hotspot. Lion-tailed macaque, yes. Lion-tailed macaque is a kind of specialty of the Western Ghats. So these are the species you typically find in that area. Now, Sundaland hotspot in India, it is present only in the region of Great Nicobar Islands. That is where. Okay, in the region of Great Nicobar Islands. Now, here you will find species such as dugong. Dugong is something you find. Leatherback turtle, right? One of the largest species of turtle that you have. They come here in order to lay their eggs, right? So these are corals, very significant, wide variety of corals is something that you find in this area, right? For example, you have the category of crabs, very unique category of crabs, horseshoe crabs, which are significantly larger, almost a meter long, those kind of species, the coconut crabs. So they are basically to be found in this region of Sundaland hotspot. So these are your 4 biodiversity hotspots which are present in the country. And this is something you should be aware of for your prelims, requirement of the prelims examination. Okay. Then you have another categorization in terms of biodiversity, and that is mega diverse countries. When we talk about biodiversity hotspots, we declare areas as biodiversity hotspots for conservation, but those areas can simultaneously lie in many countries. For example, Indo-Burma hotspot. Now, you will have a large proportion of it in the region of Myanmar also, in the region of India also. Let's suppose in that Indo-Burma hotspot, there is a decline in the elephant population. Now, Myanmar tomorrow can stand up and say that, look, we are ensuring conservation. It is in India where they are being hunted down. India can stand up and say that, no, we are not, in our country, there is no hunting or poaching. It is in Myanmar where the elephants are dying. So there is no accountability. There is not that ownership in the case of biodiversity hotspot that, okay, this is my ownership that I have to take care of or I have to cater to. Right. So that is why when we talk about these scenarios, when we talk about this lack of accountability, conservation, the purpose of it is not solved entirely well. That is where the concept of these mega diverse countries, they come into place. Mega diverse countries are those countries where you have a significant large proportion of biodiversity, and it is a term used to represent world's top biodiversity rich countries. Now, the country focused method raises national awareness of biodiversity conservation in nations with high biological diversity, with many species unique to a specific biodiversity. Why is the name Sundaland? Because basically it shares that biodiversity hotspot goes across the Indonesian arc and even spreads across Java and Sumatra. That is the Sundaland. Okay. Now, on what conditions can a country be named as megadiverse? These are the various megadiverse countries of the world. Observe the lack of megadiverse country in the entirety of the region of Europe. No megadiverse country. Almost in the entirety of North America. no megadiversity. So in these regions, the so-called good boys and the good countries of the entire world, which they love to preach us in India, that how we are basically destroying our ecosystem, how we are endangering the species. If there is an elephant which dies in India, let's suppose, due to an untoward incident or a hunting, immediately you will have articles spread all across the European journals, all across the North American journals, that India is destroying the biodiversity. They have already destroyed theirs, and now they are the preachers of the world. We still have the protection of biodiversity, which is done because we have ensured that the biodiversity is not destroyed to the same extent. Right? So, here, what are the conditionalities required for a country to be declared as megadiverse? First conditionality is they should have at least 5,000 of the world's plants as endemics. That is, to be found only in that area and nowhere else. At least 5,000 of the world's plants as endemics. Then have marine ecosystem within its borders. That is a requirement. At least one marine ecosystem around the coastal areas you should have. Now, you can have other secondary criteria also, but these are the prime criteria. Secondary criteria about the species diversity, invertebrate, in what endemism, what is the variety of invertebrate, higher level diversity, etc. So that is basically the secondary criteria, but these are the primary criteria. Now here, when we talk about the diversity across the world, where is it that we will find greater amount of diversity? In the tropics or the temperate region? What do you think? Where across the world will you find greater amount of biodiversity and why? Most of you are correct. It is in the tropics. But why? Why is it that in the tropics we find greater amount of biodiversity? Lot of sunlight, good. Stable temperature, very good. Shamil, very good. Consistent temperature throughout the year. Varsha, correct, very good. Okay. So, there are two reasons. Listen to this carefully now. There are two reasons why there is always going to be much greater biodiversity in existence in the tropics as compared to temperate areas. First reason is about the presence of sunlight throughout the year. You have almost a consistent temperature which is maintained throughout the year with high amount of sunlight. So obviously, while sunlight promotes productivity, but the consistency of temperature is very important for not only survivability, but the evolution of species. The adaptability of the species is very much determined whether the temperature factors are changing continuously. Winter is very cold, summer is a bit warm, but again, the winter is frigid. So not many of the species are able to survive that kind of a variation. So because you have consistent temperature conditions maintained throughout the year, that is one of the reasons why more species find it easier to survive. And second is the historical reason that when we talk about the tropics, in the geological history of the planet, while the planet has entered into various different ice ages, etc., the ice ages have frozen the temperate regions of the planet. Temperate regions have been completely covered in ice, but the tropics, they have remained ice free. So even in the geological history of the planet, there has been a kind of a consistency provided, and hence the species are able to survive for long. Okay, so it is because of these conditions, these two conditions of a historical legacy of consistent climatic condition and the present condition of consistent climatic condition throughout the year. That is very important for speciation and survivability. And also, obviously, when you have on an average greater amount of solar rays, that is always good throughout the year, if you have greater amount of solar rays coming in, that is always beneficial for the growth of the natural vegetation. And wherever the natural vegetation shall be thriving, shall be in abundance, that is where the other faunal species, animal species, etc., will also find it easier to survive. So this is something, again, which can be asked for a statement based question in your prelims. So please keep that in your mind. Okay. Now, then we come to extinction. What is extinction? Extinction is that situation where a species is not to be found anymore. It ceases to exist anymore. That is extinction. Ever since the evolution of life on the planet, more than 95-96% of the species which have ever existed on the planet, they are not to be found on the planet anymore. They have gone extinct. There's a kind of a cycle where on a kind of a regular basis, new species come into existence, what is referred to as speciation, and the older species, they go extinct, what is referred to as extinction. So the balance between extinction and speciation, when it is maintained, biodiversity thrives. The moment the rate of extinction goes higher and speciation is lower, that means the biodiversity will reduce. Okay, so the overall change in biodiversity results from the difference between the rates of speciation, that is the addition of new species, and the rates of extinction, taking the species away. The species no longer in existence. That is a consistent feature here. Now, over the history of life on Earth, in excess of 90%, probably more than 99% of all the species have been extinct. Compared to the duration of life on Earth, no genus has survived for very long. The longest lived persisted for around 160 million years, or around 5% of the history of life. They do go extinct because the conditions on the planet, they do keep on changing. Now, there are events in the planet's history where suddenly almost 60 to 90% of the species of that time, they suddenly cease to exist. They die altogether. That is what is known as the phase of mass extinction, where in mass, large number of species, they are not in existence anymore. That is what is the condition of mass extinction. So here, when we talk about mass extinction, it is defined as the time period in which a large percentage of all known species living at that time, that goes extinct or is completely wiped out. That is what is a mass extinction. So in the history of the planet, this has happened multiple times where the species has simply ceased to exist anymore. Right. And it has basically happened 5 times previously, and we are going through the 6th phase of mass extinction. Now, in many of the cases, we don't know the exact details why mass extinction happened, but we are able to roughly estimate what event could have led to the mass extinction. For example, when we talk about the first major mass extinction, this was initiated around 440 to 450 million years back, when 70% of all the living species at that point of time were simply eliminated. And this is said to be probably caused by the climate change induced by continental drift. In fact, certain research journals indicate, and certain contemporary scientists, their biologists rather, they indicate that the planet at that point of time would have gone through the freezing phase, where everything would have suddenly frozen. Even the oceans in many parts would have frozen because life was abundant in the oceans at that point of time. Life on land was not very abundant. So when the oceans, they started freezing, especially in the shelf area, that put to death many of the species. Then the second major mass extinction, that happened close to around 375 million years ago, where again more than 70% of all the living species at the time were wiped out, probably caused due to lack of oxygen in the oceans. Remember, I told you about this, that you had a situation where suddenly, as the growth of some of the plants started happening on the planet, and you had rainfall, excess rainfall, all that rainwater carried these plant residues, nutrients into the water, and it led to a massive level of eutrophication of the oceanic water. massive level of eutrophication. It is at this point of time when the ancestors of the modern day sharks, they went extinct. In fact, the sharks had started coming into existence. And if those species would have survived, they were much larger than the present day sharks. Those species, if they would have survived, the sharks would not have been in existence today. And so would many of the other species would not have been in existence. So you had that massive level of eutrophication, creating the harmful algal bloom, depriving the ocean of the oxygen level. So marine species, particularly in the continental shelf regions, they went extinct. It is at this point of time when you basically had many of the species taking into the deeper part of the ocean, jellyfish, etc. They went into the deeper part of the ocean and they survived, right? So that is why the species always have to go through that kind of adaptation. Then you had the third phase of major mass extinction, which happened around 250 million years ago, where an estimated 96% of all the species living on Earth at that point of time went extinct. And the reason for it is not very well known, but it is attributable to a massive level of volcanic activity going across the entirety of the planet. It is at this point where it is postulated that Pangaea, the large supercontinent which would exist, you had so much amount of volcanic activity, millions and billions of volcanic eruption happening all across the land, killing all the various different species on the land. The reptiles, which were the dominant species at this point of time. Always, the life on Earth has basically been a competition between the reptiles and the mammals, always. For a long period of time, reptiles have dominated. For a very, very long period of time. It is only very recently that we are finding the dominance of mammal species. But reptiles have always have had an edge. Right. So it is at this point of time when many of the reptilian species they went extinct. Few of the mammals, such as Lystrosaurus, now they were the easy hunt for the reptiles. Lystrosaurus could be able to survive the reptilian onslaught, and at this point of time, you had the reptilian species, which were the in a way ancestors of the present day Komodo dragon. You would have seen the giant lizards, the Komodo dragon, right? So they were the ancestors of it, much larger. Now, Lystrosaurus was one of those mammalian species which could basically dig burrows and stay underground. Now, these were the species which survived this onslaught. As the Pangaea broke, conditions stabilized. And then you had the dominance of another reptilian species. The giants came into existence. After this, you had a kind of a slight stabilization of climate. And that is when the giants came into existence. And these giants dominated the entire planet. These giants were able to adapt themselves to the conditions. And these giants were the ancestors to the modern day birds that you observe. That is the dinosaurs. It is after this phase of mass extinction that the dinosaurs they took over. But again, you had a fourth major mass extinction where major volcanic activity, basaltic flooding, etc., were the causes of extinction. The giants which had started coming, the giants which had started coming into existence, they were the ones which then survived. The remaining of them were wiped out. Now, these giants of the dinosaurs, now the world was divided into various different continents. Understand, at one point of time when you only had Pangaea, that is when we are talking about this second phase of mass extinction, the entire Pangaea was almost a desertified land. It was only across the coastlines where some amount of rainfall would occur, and that is where majority of the biodiversity would live. It is at this point of phase of the second major mass extinction when the oceanic water suddenly turned devoid of oxygen, or they turned hypoxic. Few of the low finned fishes generally, if you observe the fishes, if you generally observe the random fish schematics, fishes have fins here, somewhere here, isn't it? Now, at this point of time, a special breed of fishes, which had fins at the lower level, and they could basically support the body weight on those fins. Those fishes, they had started coming onto the ground, and that is when the life on land, in terms of the arthropods and also the reptiles, they started getting dominated. Right. Now, at this point of time, when the Pangea was entirely a desert, only few of the lizard species and the reptilian species, which could survive with very little amount of water, they were able to survive. The regions such as Atacama Desert, for example, which you find in the region of western part of South America, that has been dry for almost many millions of years, more than 200 millions of years. It was only when the world got divided into various different parts, different continents. That is when the dinosaurs, they basically began to dominate the entire landmass. There was no competition for the dinosaurs. They virtually had it all. You had the dinosaurs which could take to the sky. You had the dinosaurs which could be amphibian. You had the dinosaurs which were basically the herbivores, and you had one of the most evolved predator of its time, the T-Rex, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, the dinosaurs, which had a very short, small forelimbs. They had a very evolved case of hunting. Now, it was at this point of time where the ancestors of the present day large feline species that you have, for example, tigers, lions, the ancestors of them, they also started evolving. But dinosaurs were overtly dominating the planet, and it was the reptiles which were dominating the planet. And it would have continued in all fairness up till today, had there not been a massive catastrophic event around 65 million years ago, when a large asteroid, it struck the planet Earth. And that large asteroid, it struck the planet Earth in the region around present day region of Gulf of Mexico, and in the region of North America. Now, you might think that an asteroid struck in the region of Gulf of Mexico, how is it that life in the entirety of the planet was disturbed? Understand, when you have a large asteroid, the size of a couple of cities or more, when they come with a significant force, the temperature is very high. And when they will strike, the force of collision is so very high, temperature rises so significantly that the land in that area, what happens to the rocks when it is superbly heated, excessively heated? What happens? It melts. What happens if it is heated beyond that? Those materials even vaporize, they turn into gas. So the impact of the collision was so high that in that immediate vicinity, the land was almost vaporized. Think about the biodiversity in that region. No way it could survive. But all that meant you had tremendous amount of dust, gases, etc., which started spreading across the entirety of the atmosphere. The planet went through a phase of large-scale global dimming, where nothing was visible. And in that scenario, the plant species took a hit. The plant species, when they took a hit, the herbivore population of the dinosaurs, that declined. And that had a cascading effect on the carnivore species. Within a few years, you had massive extinction of all the dinosaurs. You have many species which survived that time. Crocodiles, they have survived that time. Species of whales survived that time. Cockroaches survived that time. Insects survived that time. One of the most efficient flying machines of that time is still to be found today. One of the most efficient, and that is the dragonfly. The dragonfly that very easily on a good sunny day you can catch it with your bare hands. This is nature's efficient flying machine. Because in the case of a dragonfly, not in many of the flies you will find two independent set of wings. Each of them can be operated independently. So the dragonfly, just like a helicopter, it can move ahead, it can stay in the same region, it can come back also. It can change direction in the midst of the flight. So these dragonflies, And these species of insects and flies, they survived. Ants are few of the species that survived. Now, at this point of time, plants found it incredibly difficult to reproduce. And for some time now, for a few millions of years now, before this extinction, the plants had developed a kind of an adaptation, a modification, which would help them reproduce. What was that adaptation? They started developing flowers, flowers of different colors, flowers of different smell, flowers of different property, which could attract the insects. And the insects would help spread the pollen and help them reproduce. That is one of the methodologies that the plants found is going to help them survive for a long period of time. That is the reason why today 70% of the plant species across the world, they are flowering plants. It is that aspect of flowering system within them which has helped them survive for a very long period of time. Right? So this is how life basically has evolved and life has gone extinct. I hope I'm able to portray and help you take a look at the larger picture of the things. And the larger picture of things is life has got a resilience in it. It has got a way to come back, regardless of the harsh scenarios on the ground. It might happen that we all witness a nuclear holocaust, maybe a nuclear war, something that we are all afraid of, that life will go permanently, Earth will get converted into Mars, life will be dead. No, we humans might go extinct, fair enough. We humans, maybe 50 million years down the line, maybe there is a kind of another cataclysmic event like an asteroid hit which we cannot control. Maybe we humans go extinct. But life will find a way to survive. Life will find a way to bounce back. Okay? So it is very preposterous and presumptuous for us humans to think in that way. That is another point of view. That it is very presumptuous for us to think that if we are not there, life is not there. No. Life goes across in its natural race. We humans have disturbed that natural race of life, that natural evolution into various species. Okay, and we are overtly concerned about the event of warming, etc. Why? Because it is impacting us. That is again where we humans are selfish enough that if the planet is warming, we will have these events which we will face crop losses, etc. So we need to save the planet. No, planet has gone through multiple worst phases of warming before that. As I told you, around 90 million years ago, when you had sudden basaltic lava eruptions happening all across. That was the time when you had underwater volcanic eruptions of a kind of a gigantic proportion, where millions of cubic meters, cubic kilometers of lava suddenly sprouted out. It was at that point of time where the islands of the Caribbean that you see, the seamounts in the Caribbeans that you see, they got created. So imagine the amount of lava which came out from the oceans. The oceanic water was almost depleted of oxygen. It was at that point of time when the ancestors of these present day giant blue whales, they went extinct. Otherwise, the oceans had much larger species. They went extinct. Ocean only was dominated by carbon dioxide. And you had the sea surface temperature in the tropics reaching around 30 degree plus on an average, and in certain cases even 40 degrees Celsius. Life survived. Life thrived. Similarly, even if we go extinct, life will thrive. Why? Because planet Earth is at that unique distance from the sun where the conditions are largely stabilized. We have the atmosphere around us where the presence of carbon dioxide, etc., ensures warming of the planet. So even if we go through an ice age, even if we go through a super cooling phase, freezing phase, again, maybe a volcanic eruption happens, carbon dioxide gets enriched in the atmosphere, there will be warming. Life will survive. However, having said that, most of this, basically, what you observe, most of this has been caused by the sudden atmospheric or planetary events, sudden planetary events, right? On which nobody had any control. Dinosaurs did not have a control on the asteroid which was going to strike them. The ancient sharks, they did not have control over the runoff water, which could basically lead to the harmful algal bloom and create the seawater to be hypoxic. None of them have any control over that. But ever since we humans, we have started colonizing the planet, we have done something far worse. We have not only polluted the planetary system, we have polluted the natural cycle of recycling of the nutrients. We have encroached into the natural habitats, limiting their space, pushing the species into extinction. So, we humans, we have initiated another phase of mass extinction. And that is what we refer to as the sixth mass extinction, for which the planet is not to blame. Regardless of whatever the IPCC tells you, regardless of whatever anything everyone else tells you, planet is not to blame. It is us. We are to blame. So that phase of sixth mass extinction, that is the worst fate of species die off since the loss of dinosaurs around 65 million years ago, right? And the current crisis is entirely caused by humans. Entirely. How mosquitoes survived. You know, another interesting fact about mosquitoes, it is we humans who has basically brought the mosquito population to the human habitations. Mosquitoes were never interested in human blood. In their natural evolutionary cycle, they would always be found in the swamps and marshes, right? And they would basically, the origin of the first flies which happened, that happened from the marshes, the first small flies. They wanted to escape the predators. They started developing those kind of a hopping technique, and that is when the flies came. So the mosquitoes, they were never interested in human blood. They were happy living in the forests. But we humans, we went into the forest. And due to the loss of biodiversity, the mosquitoes had no choice. And that is when you had a breed of mosquitoes, which basically were suited only to human blood. They developed a liking only for the human blood. And we have carried them over, starting from the region of Tanzania, Eastern Africa. That is where, for the first time, mosquito and the human population, that underwent that convergence. And ever since that point of time, we have carried the mosquitoes and spread them across the globe. And we are talking about the mosquitoes interested in humans. Okay? Now, then basically 99% of the currently threatened species are at risk from human activities, primarily those driving habitat loss, introduction of the exotic species that we do, right? For example, Lantana camara, Senna spectabilis. These are the plants not naturally found in India. Red-eared slider turtle, not naturally found in India. We have brought them in our country. Why? Because a few amongst us, we feel that this is a species of South America. It looks very nice in my garden. I will bring it over. Then you don't have a control over them. Regardless of howsoever we feel we are superior, we don't have control over nature's forces. And they have basically propagated. And these exotic species have meant the loss of biodiversity for many of the areas. In the past 500 years, approximately 1,000 species that we know of, those 1,000 species have gone extinct. Imagine how many species we are not even aware that due to human activities, they have virtually gone extinct. So that is the aspect of mass extinction. We presently are witnessing the sixth major mass extinction in the history of planet Earth, right? However, there is a unique species which has survived it all, which is said to have survived it all. And that is a very small microscopic species. That is what is known as the tardigrade or the water bear. Now, this is a kind of a unique species where it has got the ability to completely shut down its biological activities and still stay alive. It will be able to completely shut down everything, right? And it will still be able to stay alive. So What did we humans do? When we found out that this is a species which is able to survive, what did we do? We took it to space. Let's see if it dies there. It did not. In deep saline formations, it survived. So this is the one of those species that have survived all 5 mass extinctions known to man. And it can survive in temperatures as low as minus 200 degrees Celsius without food and water. Even in space for a long time, these species can survive. Okay, and this represents the kind of early species. Observe this. This represents the kind of early species and their existence. When life, even on in the sea, when that started evolving, you had a similar kind of an orifice or opening that the species had. Sea anemones, for example, is one of those. The sea anemones basically had a similar kind of an opening. Sea anemones have managed to survive, right? So that is basically the case of extinction. Okay. How the reptilians lost edge over the mammals? It was 65 million years ago when the reptilians suddenly, in mass proportions, they died. That is when they lost the edge. But we never know exactly what is going to happen in the future. We never know, because historically there has been certain phases where the reptilian population has basically, and the reptilian species have basically taken a kind of a back seat. For example, take a look at the evolution of these reptilian species. The Komodo dragon. Komodo dragon is not the fastest species out there, is it? It has got the venom though. Now, with that venom, it can basically hunt a prey and lie there somewhere. It is sure that the prey will die in some distance. Take a look at crocodiles. They have also evolved from them. Crocodiles, they will lie patiently underwater for such a long time. Crocodiles can reduce their heartbeat to almost 2 per minute, and they can absolutely reduce their body's requirement. They are able to survive. So reptilians are also great survivors out there. So you never know that what kind of species is in existence. Okay. Now, then we talk about the international conventions and organizations. This is relevant for your prelims as well as for your mains examination. Primarily for your prelims is where this is going to be very, very important. So here, when we talk about this, for example, we will start with the Bonn Convention. This is relevant only for your prelims. So basically, the Bonn Convention is also known as the Convention on Migratory Species. The species which migrate from one area to another in between the various different seasons. Across the planet, you have great migrations which are taking place on a daily basis. Not only terrestrial and avian species. Obviously, the birds will migrate. Obviously, the terrestrial species will migrate. You even have the species, for example, when you talk about aquatic species, all the various different kind of species, they migrate from one region to another. Now, the concept in this is very simple. That if you have to conserve a species which migrates from one region to another, let's suppose this is one of the areas which is their home region or the home habitat. Now, in the harsh conditions, they will be migrating, let's suppose, to here. And again, when the conditions are favorable, they will get back here. If the conditions become unfavorable here, they will face a danger. If the conditions become unfavorable here, they will face a danger. If they are hunted in between, they will face a danger. So if you have to conserve a migratory species, you have to tackle these particular vulnerabilities. Okay, so that is the purpose for which the Bonn Convention was arrived at in 1979. That is when the Bonn Convention came into existence. So it was signed in 1979. Okay, and here basically the convention entered into force in 1983. You don't have to learn when it was signed, when it came into force. You don't have to memorize that at all. It aims to conserve terrestrial, marine, and avian migratory species from their habitat as well as throughout their range, throughout their movement. Objective is adoption of strict protection measures for endangered migratory species. And this is a kind of a multilateral agreement which is done between the countries for the conservation, management of migratory species, and cooperative research activities. Now, here it has got two appendices. Species are listed in two appendices. Appendix 1 lists those species that are classified as endangered with a high risk of extinction and where urgent international cooperation is required. Those kind of species are listed in Appendix 1. Then Appendix 2. These are those kind of species which would significantly benefit from the international agreements. They are not exactly at the verge of extinction, but if you ensure their protection, they would benefit. So this is where they are divided into two appendices. It has got legally binding agreements and MOUs which are not legally binding, and they are tailored according to the conservation requirements of any particular region. Now, here also, the highest decision-making body, as is the case with any convention, which is the highest decision-making body of any convention? Are we aware? COP. Very good. Here also, the highest decision-making body is the Conference of Parties. Okay. Now, India has been a part of this Bonn Convention ever since that came into force, and migratory species that require conservation, Amur falcons, bar-headed geese, black-necked cranes, marine turtles, dugongs, humpback whales, all of them, they require conservation, right? Whales, even in the region of Bay of Bengal, at one point of time, they were very dominant. We hunted them out. Not us, but people hunted them out there also. If even today you go to Sri Lanka to visit Sri Lanka, the entire tourism thrives on ecotourism. They will take you to the natural places, mangroves, backwaters, something that we have started marketing in the case of Kerala, but I still have a strong sense of feeling that we are still not doing enough. The ecological diversity that we have in our country is almost unparalleled anywhere, right? Go to any of the, in different countries, go to any of the natural and the national protected areas, the safaris that they take you to, the protected zoos that it take you to. One of the ironical facts that you will find is majority of the species that they will indicate to you, they will tell you it is naturally found in India, it is naturally found in the region of India, Sri Lanka. We have that biological diversity, but we need to conserve them. So if you today, even today, you go to Sri Lanka, they will take you for the sighting of the humpback whale, right? In India, it is sighted far off the coast. That is why we don't have that kind of an ecotourism. But still, there is potential off the coast of Andaman Nicobar, off the coast of Tamil Nadu, even. That is the region where you will have the humpback whales. They come to that area. Okay. Now, then you have the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, this is relevant for your prelims and mains. Now, remember, I told you earlier also that in 1972, you had an ever-encompassing Stockholm Conference which was conducted. Now, that Stockholm Conference, which was held in 1972, identified the triple threats that mankind and the planet faced. One was pollution, other was climate change, and the third was loss of biodiversity. It was agreed unanimously that if any of these goes beyond proportion, it will be very difficult to survive. So that is why here, basically various different norms, various different conventions was arrived at to tackle pollution, to tackle climate change, and to tackle loss of biodiversity. So in 1992, that is almost 20 years after the Stockholm Conference, in order to commemorate the Stockholm Conference, in 1992, you had the Earth Summit. Earth Summit. Sundaresh, you can find it online in Rio Janeiro. Okay. Now here, amongst the conventions on climate change, Convention to Combat Desertification, another convention which was arrived at here was the Convention on Biological Diversity. That was the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this was the convention which was arrived at in 1992. Now, ever since that point of time, CBD has always been about the conservation of the species and tackling with the threat. We have looked at the causes which lead to the loss of biodiversity. So this is basically about tackling those threats which are causing a loss of biodiversity. So here, if you take a look at the CBD, it is an international treaty which was adopted at the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992. Convention recognized for the first time in international law that conservation of biological diversity is a common concern of humankind and an integral part of the process of development. That was arrived at as a consensus. Now, earlier also I had told you that convention sets a larger goal, a larger objective. It doesn't give you a time bound target that you have to achieve or how you will achieve the objectives. That is not, the pathway is not shown by the convention. It will tell you a larger goal. How do you achieve that objective? For that you have protocols, right? A simple analogy that I always give, which you can associate with, is the case. For example, let's suppose few of you, a couple of friends, or 4 to 5 friends, you decide that we will prepare for civil services. So one fine day, you go have a jolly good time. You spend some time, maybe somewhere in a cafeteria, in a CCD or a Domino's, and you together decide that, you know what, we will clear the civil services examination. When, where, how, which optional, by which point of time, not decided. We'll clear the civil services examination. So that is like a convention, right? You can name it a Domino's convention or a CCD convention for all that matters. But after maybe 4 or 5 weeks, few of you realize that, okay, that is our goal, but how do we achieve it? By when do we finish the GS? What is the optional strategy, etc.? That needs to be decided. So again, all of you sit together after 4 to 5 months to detail out the various intricacies required. That will be a protocol. Okay, so in order to achieve the goals of the convention, you have a targeted detailing which is done. That is a protocol. So here, when we talk about CBD, that also has got a couple of protocols which is about helping achieve its objectives. So what are the objectives of CBD? It has got 3 main goals: conservation of biological diversity, sustainable use of its components. For example, when we talk about the genetic modified organisms, now that is also a component of biodiversity. Now let's suppose you have genetically modified an animal, right? For example, tiger and a lioness, they were crossbred to form a kind of a liger, right? So those kind of very heavy beasts, if you suddenly introduce into the ecosystem, maybe that species won't survive or the other species won't be able to survive. So you cannot randomly introduce a kind of a modified biodiversity or a modified species anywhere. You need to have a sustainable use of it, right? So that is where sustainable use of the components particularly concentrated around living modified organisms. That is LMOs. Sustainable use of biodiversity, where you don't make any particular biodiversity go extinct. And the third goal is fair and equitable sharing of what? Of benefits arising from genetic resource. Let's suppose You are a resident of a region in Uttarakhand, let's suppose, and your area, there is a discovery of a plant which has got the capability to cure cancer, let's suppose. Now, immediately, multinationals will swoop in into that area. All they will focus upon is extraction of that plant, utilization of that plant. Right. Now, you won't be left with basically the local population. They won't have any benefit out of it. So, as a local, you will also not ensure greater level of protection. As a local, if somebody pays you 10 lakh rupees or 50 lakh rupees that give me access to the region where you have a lot of these plants, you will show them easily. So that is why, in order to ensure a sustained conservation, the local population needs to be made a stakeholder in the entire process of conservation. The local population needs to be made a kind of a stakeholder. So that is where you will find that fair and equitable sharing of benefits, if it is done with the local population also benefits. This is to make local population a stakeholder in the process of conservation. So in order to achieve these objectives, you had the protocols which were set. For achieving this objective, you had the Cartagena protocol. Where is Cartagena? By the way, it is not Cartagena, it is not Cartagena, as many of you pronounce. It is Cartagena. So Cartagena protocol was to ensure the sustainable use of the components. And then 10 years later, you had another protocol for fair and equitable sharing. That is Nagoya protocol. Nagoya protocol. Cartagena is in Colombia, right? You would have seen the TV series for Colombia, Narcos. If you have, I'm not suggesting. The series that I'm suggesting is based on environment ecology. These are the side things that many of you do and you don't admit. So basically, if you would have seen that much famed TV series, you would have come across Cartagena multiple times. But that is about the Cartagena and the Nagoya protocol. So let us take a look at that. So here, the CBD covers the rapidly expanding field of biotech through Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, addressing technology development and transfer of technology, benefit sharing, and biosafety issue. Now, the convention is legally binding. This is a provision relevant for your prelims. Convention is legally binding, so the countries that join it are obliged to implement its various provisions. Okay. Now, when we take a look at the Cartagena Protocol, it is the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety to the Convention on Biological Diversity. It is an international agreement which basically aims to ensure safe handling, transport, and use of the LMOs resulting from modern biotech, which comes into place where the organisms can easily be modified to have a kind of an advantage, natural advantage over the others. So just to ensure that the other species are not damaged, you have to take this Cartagena protocol. So it also takes into account risks to the human health. It establishes, what it does is, let's suppose you have from one country A to B, you are about to transport a kind of an organism which has been altered by biotechnology. You cannot simply transfer it over. You need to have an advanced informed agreement procedure where you will have a biosafety clearing house in B. You will have a biosafety clearing house. that biosafety clearinghouse will evaluate, analyze all the details of this organism that you are going to introduce. It will evaluate whether it is safe in this country B for the other biodiversity or not. After that, you arrive at an advanced informed agreement, AIA, and only then you ensure the transfer. Okay, so here it establishes an AIA procedure for ensuring that countries are provided with the information necessary to make informed decisions before agreeing to the import of such organisms into their territory. So the Cartagena Protocol also establishes a biosafety clearinghouse to facilitate the exchange of information on LMOs and assist countries for the implementation. It was adopted in the year 2000. When it came to the force is not at all important. You had another protocol, and that was the Nagoya Protocol. Nagoya Protocol was aimed at ensuring fair and equitable benefit sharing of what? Of the benefits that are arrived from the utility of the biodiversity, plants, animals, etc. Right? As one of you pointed out, venoms from snake, for example. Right? So the local community should also get benefit out of it. So that is where, when the Conference of Parties was being held in Japan, in Nagoya, in the Nagoya region of Japan, that is where the Nagoya Protocol was arrived at. Now, it is an international agreement which aims at sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources in a fair and equitable way with the local community, to make the local community a stakeholder in the process of conservation, including by appropriate access to genetic resources and by appropriate transfer of relevant tech. Okay. Now, here at this particular conference of party, at a conference of party which was held in the region of in Japan, in the region of Nagoya, there was a detailed discussion which was held about what should be the strategy, a 10-year strategy. This was held around 2010. So, what should be the 10-year strategy for conservation of biodiversity? And basically, you had 20 targets which were arrived at. That, first of all, we need to ensure mainstreaming of the discussion of biodiversity, so that the policymakers, they discuss the loss of biodiversity issue. Then we should prevent the destruction of habitats, fragmentation of habitats. We should control the invasive alien species. We should control the human based extinctions, etc. So these were the various intricacies and details which were ironed out. And there was a list of targets which were arrived for the conservation of biodiversity along with that protocol. And those were known as the HE biodiversity targets. Those HE biodiversity targets were set to be achieved for 2020, and you had a set of 20 targets. So it was adopted in 2010 in Nagoya, in Japan. Now, in 2024, if you are appearing for the exams, nobody will ask you to list the 20 targets of the HE biodiversity target, but just for your awareness, how the target setting was done. So, for example, improve awareness of biodiversity, mainstream biodiversity, provide incentives for reform, implement plans for sustainability. Then, for example, reduce habitat loss and degradation. So, you had various strategic goals: address the underlying cause of biodiversity loss, mainstreaming biodiversity in conversation across government and society. Then, reduce the direct pressure on biodiversity by ensuring sustainable use, sustainability of fishes, make farming and forestry sustainable, reduce pollution, tackle invasive species, minimize the impact of climate change. These were the targets, the 20 targets which were decided, that if we do that, if we achieve that by 2020, we would have taken a considerable amount of step in the conservation of biodiversity. Protect and manage critical sites, prevent extinction, maintain genetic diversity, safeguard ecosystem services, restore the degraded forest, implement access and benefit sharing, then protect traditional knowledge, national biodiversity action plans, increase conservation finance. These were the strategic goals. Now, what is your estimate? Were we successful as a global community in achieving these targets? What do you think? Were, as a global community, as the parties of this convention, were we able to achieve that? No, obviously not. and in International Committee of Nations in international agreements, whenever you are unable to meet a target, what is done? You set a new target. Just like in your preparation of civil services. I will appear for the exam next year. I will clear the exam next year. By the month of February end or March, it is becoming very hectic. I won't be able to achieve this target. I will clear the exam next year. Next year, I will get rank within rank 100. Again, next year, March comes. You know what? This time I have not prepared the optional. I will clear the exam in 2026. Rank 1 will be my name. So just like that, the world polity also works like that. You simply set up a new target. Now, this target was set to be achieved by 2020. So the world required a setting up of a new target. But the Conference of Parties in 2020 could not be held. And by the way, this is not an annual Conference of Party which is held. For the CBD, Conference of Parties is held every 2 to 3 years. Now, 2020, the world was suffering from pandemic. 2021, world was suffering from pandemic. It was in late 2021 when you had this Conference of Parties, which was initiated in Kunming in China. China was supposed to be the host of the Conference of Parties. But then again, that third wave of the Omicron variant of COVID struck. And that is when basically it was shortly wrapped up and not a major consensus was arrived at. It was decided that in 2022, we will have that Conference of Party resume again in Kunming. But 2022, by the end of the year, China was suffering from the worst spate of COVID pandemic. So you had a kind of the shortened version of that meeting, which was held in Montreal. That is where the Secretariat of CBD is situated. It is situated in Montreal in Canada. So that is where we arrived at the next set of targets to be achieved by 2030 and the Global Biodiversity Plan up till 2050. That is what is also referred to as the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, which was arrived at the 15th Conference of Parties to CBD. So here it convened under the auspices of United Nations, chaired by China, hosted by Canada. The 15th Conference of Parties to UNCBD adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including 4 goals and 23 targets set to be achieved by 2030. Now here, the goal set by this agreement, you had 4 different goals which were set. Now, halt in human-induced extinction, increase in area of the natural ecosystem by 2050, maintaining the genetic diversity of the species, which is very important for survivability, sustainably restoring the ecosystems, fair and equitable share. So you observe the trend here. The targets are very similar to the HE biodiversity targets. The only reason I have kept the HE biodiversity targets in the PPT is so that you can observe the trend here. It is very same. Just as you say, that old wine in a newer bottle. The targets were almost the same. Some cosmetic changes were done. And you had, these were the goals, and the targets were reducing threat to biodiversity, meeting people's need through sustainable use and benefit sharing of the biodiversity, tools and solutions for implementation. So here you had certain pointed targets. First, to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance close to zero, so that such areas very critical for biodiversity should not be lost anymore by the year 2030. No more land degradation, etc. Then you had 30 by 30 goal. What was this? To bring 30% of area under conservation by 2030. Then halt human-induced extinction. After that, impact of invasive alien species has to be reduced. So impact of invasive species to be reduced. by 50% by 2030. Reduce the impact due to pollution, reduce the impact due to climate change. These were the targets, okay, which has been decided late last year and early this year is when the entire publication and the entire, in a way, the implementation of it is sought to begin. Now here, for the first time, big companies and corporates, they were also made accountable. Accountable for what? Accountable for furnishing the idea that if you are talking about, if you are making a particular product, then what amount of biodiversity is getting destroyed to create that product? Are you doing it in a naturally sustainable way, or are you actually destroying the ecosystem in order to achieve that? Right? So regularly monitor, assess, and transparently disclose their risk, dependencies, and impact on biodiversity. Provide information needed to consumers. Why? Because if you and I, we are aware, let's suppose that for the manufacturing of any of the products that we consume from the market, if biodiversity is destroyed from there, then we will make sustainable choices. We'll make responsible choices. Then report on compliance with access and benefit sharing, that whether the local community is benefiting from that or not. Pharmaceutical drugs, for example, pharma industries have to publish that, right? So additional features, for example, countries like India, they demanded that, look, presently whatever is your funding mechanism, that is funding mechanism of CBD is GEF, Global Environment Facility. I'll tell you about it tomorrow again. So the funding mechanism needs to be spruced up. The funding mechanism needs to be polished up, because GEF, Global Environment Facility, is not giving us the funds when we require for the conservation of biodiversity. It has got funds, but it basically releases only in the preferred choices. So please establish a special task fund, so that special trust fund, so that the countries can benefit from that. Then the agreement also obliges the countries to report every 5 years or less about the status, the stock take of the conservation of biodiversity. By 2030, mobilizing at least $200 per year, including international finances, domestic resource mobilization, and leveraging the private finance. You have to mobilize that much amount a year for conservation. So this is about the CBD. Then you have the sites. This is conservation of, or basically convention on international trade in endangered species of flora and fauna. This was arrived at way back in 1973. Now, as per this convention, basically, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, the understanding has always been that, look, majority of the hunting of the species which is taking place, majorly it is happening for trade. The animals, they are hunted for their parts, right? So if we are able to ban that trade, we will be able to conserve the species also, right? So this is a species, this is a convention on international trade in endangered species of wild flora and fauna. Here you have a global agreement amongst the governments to regulate or ban international trade in species under threat, right? So here it came into force in 1975 and consists of 183 member countries till date. It is legally binding. This is again important, relevant for your prelims. So, as per the provisions of CITES, it is legally binding on the parties, right? However, in order to ban that trade, it is not an international law which will tell India how to ban the trade on tiger parts. You need your own national laws for that. So while this CITES is legally binding, but then it does not take place of the national laws. India has been a party of CITES ever since 1976. That is not required. Now, this CITES, as per the CITES, you have the division of the species into 3 appendices. In Bonn Convention or CMS, you had 2 appendices. Here, you have 3 appendices. So here, Appendix 1, species that are in danger of extinction, right? Here, commercial trade is absolutely prohibited. However, trade for research can be carried out. So here, trade is permitted just for research, and that too, if the origin country ensures that the trade won't harm the species' chance of survival. Okay. Yes, sir. Then it is the GEF or newly established GBF. Till now, it is GEF which manages that. Femina red sander star turtle. Yes. So basically, that is about Appendix 1, where only under certain cases, only under certain requirements, you can carry out trade, but the country which is sending out the species or exporting that species, that country will be held responsible for the conservation. Okay. Appendix 2, species that aren't facing imminent extinction but need monitoring, trade permits are obtained legally. Appendix 3, species which are in conservation in at least one of the countries, right? So, for example, take the case of Carousel. Carousel is a kind of a species of cats, right? Different feline species, cat family rather, which has got long pointy ears, which you find in the kind of the region of semi-arid areas of Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. Now, Carousel in West Asia, in Middle East, it is found in significant proportion. In India, the population is various. So such kind of species can be put under Appendix 3. Regulations can vary, but typically the country that requested the listing issues export permits. Now here, every 2 to 3 years, the COP is held to review the implementation of the convention, the norms of the convention. And 19th meeting of the COP to the sites was held in 2022. The latest COP was held in 2022 in Panama City. Now, COP 19 was also known as the World Wildlife Conference. The 19th COP to the sites was held in Panama City, and here they accepted the proposal to include sea cucumbers in Appendix 2. Sea cucumbers, just like a kind of the cucumber, the shape is very similar to the cucumbers that you find here in large shape. But then these are the ones which help maintain the alkalinity of the ocean. They are the ones which consume the marine debris, and with their excretion, they maintain the alkalinity. So they are very important in order to fight the acidification of oceans. Sea cucumbers, they are very important, found off the coast of, even in Indian coastline, you will find them particularly across the Tamil Nadu coastline. You find them off the coast of Australia. Now, sea cucumbers have been traded significantly. And which is the destination country? Always, whenever you have an illegal trade of exotic species of animals or plants, mostly the destination country is the same. And what is that? China. Most of them. That is basically China. If it is COP19, then how COP28 can be done in 2023? A very good and logical question. Sea cucumber is a plant, is an animal, yes. Understand, my dear friend, COP28 that is in so much of discussion, it is not the only conference of parties. You have multiple different conventions for which conference of parties are taking place. The COP28 that you are following in news is about the Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is for Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. I understand that just now I have complicated the subject quite significantly for you, but it is absolutely a high point of time that you are aware that when you hear about COP28, it is not there is not only one any convention will have multiple members. They will convene together and there will be a conference of parties, right? So it is very different from this conference of parties that you have. India's Shisham is also included in Appendix 2 of the convention, thereby requiring the CITES regulation for the trade of the species. Then few of the smaller bodies only relevant for your prelims. World Wildlife Fund for Nature. World Wildlife Fund for Nature is the world's biggest international non-profit organization, established in 1961. Partnership with people, bodies, governments worldwide. It works for conservation of various species such as tigers, elephants, gorillas, giant pandas, sea turtles, polar bears, and so on. The campaigns launched by World Wildlife Fund for Nature include the Earth Hour and Debate Debt for Nature Swap. Then Living Planet Report, this is relevant for your prelims, is generated by WWF every 2 years. Then you have traffic. Traffic is again trade records analysis of flora and fauna in commerce. This is again to prevent the trade of the animal parts and the species illegally. So it is a joint program of WWF and IUCN, combinedly WWF and IUCN. Right? Now, established in 1976, focuses on species trade issues such as tiger parts, elephant tusk, etc. Now, they study for leopard, tiger, peacock feather trade, etc. And here, South Asia Wildlife Enforcement Network, or SAWAN, is one of those collaborations for the same purpose, which is led by the South Asian countries, okay, to prevent that illegal trade. Okay. Now, let us take few of the PYQs. Starting with the PYQ, or the topic that we have just covered. With reference to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources, IUCN, and the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna CITES, which of the following statements is or are correct? IUCN is an organ of United Nations and CITES is an laws. Correct. Field projects around the world for better managing the natural environment. So here, correct answer is environment program. Don't disappoint. Funded by two only. It is a technique of cleaning up pollution by enhancing the same biodegradation that by them are correct. All of you are correct. Good. I've given the correct answer. Completely treated. The Miyawaki method, incorrect. Genetic engineering can be used for modifying the microbes. So the correct answer is going to be C. One and semi-arid areas, mini femina, Tepal, Balraj, creation of mini forest in the urban areas. In the context of mitigating the impending global warming due to anthropogenic emissions of carbon dioxide, which of the following can be the potential sites for carbon sequestration? Abandoned and uneconomic coal seams, depleted oil and gas reserves, subterranean deep saline formations. This, the correct answer is all of them. In all of these, this is a geological sequestration. Carbon saline and is oxide and sulfur dioxide. B is the correct answer. We'll take the remaining of the questions later, tomorrow, and then we will come to the portion of conservation measures. So that shall be all for today. You have the webinar to attend as well. So do attend the webinars. That will be all for the session. Till we meet again tomorrow, do take care of yourself. Leaderboard. Okay.